With 13 seasons, not to mention a revival that's been in the works, King of the Hill is definitely still one of the most iconic adult cartoons. And today we're grilling up a ranking of every character from worst to best on our King of the Hill tier list, powered by that clean burning propane.
Oh yeah!
And now, while King of the Hill is a remarkably well-written show, we do have to begin with the F tier, reserved for those minor characters we just couldn't stand. Starting with Luann's parents, Leanne and Hoyt Platter. Both of these two were delegated to single-episode appearances that do a great job of illustrating just how much they both absolutely suck. Leanne is a short-tempered, violent alcoholic who abuses and attempts murder on her partners. She also refuses to be a mother to Luann, treating her like a friend at best and a burden at worst. And as for Hoyt, his appearance doesn't come until season 12 in the episode Life, A Loser's Manual. A very accurate name, by the way. And here he crashes with the Hills, convinces Luann to loan him some cash, and worst of all, guilt trips Lucky into taking the fall for a robbery. These two are the essence of deadbeat parents. But next is a character we feel slightly more sympathetic towards, Caleb. The obnoxious son of Hank's pushover neighbor and Hank's bully. And we only rank him second to last because he's a kid. I'm sure Caleb has the potential to grow up to be a perfectly okay guy, but thanks to his spineless parents, he sees no issue with constantly harassing his middle-aged neighbor. I mean, he messed up Hank's lawn, and you just don't mess with a man's lawn. But the worst thing about Caleb is that his idea of an insult is
Dusty old bones full of green dust.
like, why green specifically? And how would bones be dusty? Honestly, your insults are just bad, Caleb. If you're gonna harass somebody, at least do it right. And you see, now this is how you harass someone. Look at Mrs. Wakefield. Like Caleb, she comes from a pretty infamous episode. Mrs. Wakefield is widely regarded as one of the worst episodes of the entire series. But whether you agree with that sentiment or not, you have to admit that Hank had every right to be weirded the heck out by this strange old woman's insistence on dying in his house. The whole town practically bullied poor Hank into letting her die in the middle of a freaking Christmas party. It's one of those episodes where Hank is, like, the only somewhat reasonable character.
Please, Hank, let Ms. Wakefield die in my house.
I guess the ending where he invites her over to not die is kinda sweet, but, like, she never appears again. She might be dead, but we don't accept excuses on this channel. They say there's got to be a morning after, and the morning of this next spot goes to General Gum.
Be a morning after.
We'll give him this. He's a decent father to Ming. Thoughtful enough to get her cute little elephant figurines from his travels. He's also a total bully to his son-in-law, however, and spends his entire first and only appearance tormenting him for every little thing. His ego is the absolute essence of narcissism, and he's one of those characters who contributes literally nothing to the show except for being a total jerk. Heck, he doesn't even get the typical heartwarming ending you'd expect from the show in his episode. The best thing this character does is literally just go away. And rounding out our F tier, we have the lady who, in my opinion, just does not deserve William Fontaine de la Tour d'Autrive, Lenore. Really, what is there to say about this woman? Her whole character is literally just a justification for how depressing Bill's life is. She cheated on him, broke his heart in the divorce, then tried to break his heart again when he briefly hooked up with Governor Ann Richards. I'm not saying she's a cheating, lying gold digger with few redeeming qualities. We're saying she's a cheating, lying gold digger with no redeeming qualities. But now we move into the characters who have at least some redemptive moments and qualities. These are the D tier characters. Starting with Delia from the episode Escape from Party Island. If you're wondering why we even bothered mentioning such a minor character, it's because this episode, which sees Hank chauffeuring his mother and her nursing home loyalty club members on a trip to a ceramic figurine museum, is one of the most secondhand irritating episodes of the whole show. Delia is easily the most abrasive of the bunch, which leads to her being both the funniest and most grating old lady in that car. But to her credit, she also led to one of our favorite Hank Hill quotes in the whole show.
Which one of you is Delia?
She is.
I could commit you like that.
Next up, we have Dee Dee Hill, the new wife of Cotton Hill. Their marriage is based on the purest form of love, a nice butt, and a man short enough to enjoy it. You'd think that Dee Dee would have more opportunity to shine, given that she's married to her former kindergarten classmate's father.
Oh, she is not my mother. Hell, we went to kindergarten together.
But Dee Dee doesn't really have all that much to her. She really is just Cotton's wife. She also loses some serious points for that one episode where she forces Bobby to raise her and Cotton's baby. Moving on to Coach Cleamer. He's the coach. Like, remember that one episode where he coached? Or the one that he has a funny voice, I guess, so moving on.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's talk about Connie's cousin, Tid Pao, who only appeared one time in Season 7. And it's a shame because as the polar opposite of her well-behaved cousin, she made for a pretty interesting plotline. With Bobby's help and a bit of middle school seduction, she works to cook drugs to pay off her debts back home. After she was exposed, Con sent her to work with her uncle, which hopefully turned her life around, and honestly, it would have been interesting to see the end result in a future episode. Moving on to Emily the Hall Monitor. You know how a series always has those side characters who appear like all the time but you don't even know their name? That's basically her, and she's basically just following the orders of Principal Moss. But it's hard not to resent such an obvious principal's pet. And of course, we also have to rank Principal Moss kinda low as well. He's a bad principal, but not in the Principal Lewis from American Dad sort of way. He's not really a criminal, he's just an incompetent coward. He's willing to jeopardize the health and safety of his students for the sake of covering his own tail, and he never really manages to prove himself in a positive light. Every time he's given the chance to prove that he cares more about his students than his reputation, he just slinks back into his seat. At best, he's a little funny, and at worst, which is most of the time, he's just useless. And with that said, we'll go ahead and move into the characters who are just alright. This is the C tier, and we're gonna start with Nancy Hicks Gribble. Now, I'll say it right off the bat, yes, Nancy really does deserve to be in the F tier. Her character's entire shtick is being a cheating wife who refuses to own up to her misdeeds even years after they've occurred. She has Dale raise the son of her affair partner, and while he's admittedly a decent father, that doesn't take away from how scummy of an action that is overall. She did eventually stop the affair. In one episode, she was told by both a doctor and her mother that she was losing her hair due to the stress of not banging John Redcorn, what's known as hoe pattern baldness. Jokes aside, even with this taken into consideration, Nancy did ultimately decide to stick by Dale for once, which shows that she has changed on some level, and she does have a couple episode arcs that are actually pretty entertaining. Next, we have Tilly Hill, Hank's loving mother. She's not a particularly funny character, but she's pretty much always sympathetic. Honestly, anyone who's had to deal with Cotton as a life partner would be. When Tilly needs help, Hank's best attributes ultimately come out. One of the best scenes to show this comes from the episode where the guys attend a lawnmower focus group, and Hank finally calls out his dad for bad-mouthing his mother.
And if you ever talk about my mom or my mower like that again, you're not welcome in my house.
Moving on to GH, aka
Good Hank.
Man, I like Cotton, but he really was a jerk. The level of pettiness it must take to name your baby as a good version of your own adult son is just crazy. Hilarious, but ridiculous. But to GH's credit, he is a baby, and apparently he's able to fire a gun at age like 0.
He loves to shoot.
And still, GH works so well simply for the good Hank joke. Next up, we have a certified genius and certified boss, Jimmy Witchard. "I'm the boss," Jimmy said calmly.
You're the boss, Jimmy. I'm the boss.
You might remember him most prominently from the episode where he was, in fact, a boss. Bobby's boss, to be specific. Granted, he's an absolutely horrendous boss, but he did lead to what was probably Hank's greatest ass-kicking of the entire series. When he orders Bobby to go across a racetrack to give him a soda, Hank summons all of his propane-sourced power to tear down a fence and literally kick Jimmy in the ass several times. They say Hank was only using 10% of his power to do that. Moving on to another sketchy antagonist, Debbie Grund. What's that? Nobody puts Debbie Grund in C tier?
Nobody rejects Debbie Grund!
Well, we just did. Sure, she's an awful person, but the idea of someone accidentally shooting themselves for the sole reason that they wanted some gas station nachos is pretty hilarious. Plus, the episodes revolving around her murder mystery were some of the best in the whole series, so she definitely deserves some points just for that. Let's give a quick mention to Elvin and Mud Dauber, Lucky's friends. These two are ride or dies in the purest sense of the word. If Lucky needs them, or they even suspect that he needs them, they'll be there in seconds. I don't know of anything else particularly striking to say about them, but good friends are invaluable, so we gotta give them some credit. And closing out this section is the very first antagonist of the series, Twig Boy. I'm sure he has a name, but come on, as a fan of the show, I'd be doing this guy a serious disservice if I called him anything but
Twig Boy!
He's the social worker who showed up in the pilot episode to prove that Hank was an unfit father to Bobby, even after his boss specifically told him not to. He even appears again in the episode Junkie Business, where Hank hires a drug addict and is unable to fire him, as long as he's seeking help. You can always count on Twig Boy when you need him, as long as you're trying to take advantage of legal loopholes. Actually, Lucky would be great friends with this dude. Now let's move on to the B tier, for characters who shine almost as bright as a delightfully clean-burning tank of pure propane. First up is Dale's father, Bug Gribble. Of course, he's probably not Dale's biological dad, since it's far likelier that Dale was descended from the same aliens that assassinated JFK. But that's just basic King of the Hill lore, of course. Regardless, biological or not, he and his son had problems in their relationship. Bug also prompted one of the funniest awkward Hank Hill responses in the show.
Are you gay?
No, I sell propane.
Next is a name that strikes terror into the hearts of honest propane salesmen everywhere, Fatherton. All you need to know about this propane peddler is that he's basically an unmasked Buck Strickland. Whereas Buck is a sleazebag who keeps up the appearance of a simple, honest business, Fatherton wears his heart on his sleeve. And it's not a very good heart. He uses dishonest business practices, objectifies his female employees, and takes advantage of everything and everyone that he can to make a quick buck. With all that said though, it is nice to occasionally see Buck offset by someone even shadier than he is. Next up is the head of Arlen First Methodist, Reverend Carol Stroop. She does have her underhanded moments, but Reverend Stroop is usually one of the nicer people in Arlen. When she briefly dates Bill in one episode, she shows genuine love to him and accepts him, warts and all, which frankly we can't say for any other woman he's been with. Stroop is a decent person, even if she's far from the funniest character, and sometimes just being a compassionate person is worth its weight in gold. Next up is a character who's super, just super, Ted Wasanasan.
Please, do not make this awkward.
He's basically the object of envy for Khan's family. As a high-standing member of Nine Rivers Country Club, Khan and Ming are always trying to get into his good graces, which can lead to some pretty funny plot lines. Ted is a two-faced hypocrite, but that's what makes him enjoyable. Like, this is the guy that Khan idolizes. This is the peak of masculinity in Khan's mind. And there's also just something inexplicably funny about his line delivery.
Super.
Guess what? Chicken butt. Oh, and also Buckley's next. He was Luann's boyfriend for the first 2 seasons of the show before he tragically died in an explosion. And my god, that escalated quickly. Thankfully, Buckley didn't really contribute too much to the show before his demise. I mean, he might have had a funny one-liner here and there, but he was just kinda, well, there.
Hey.
That said, the trampoline episode where his angel comes back to give Luann closure was admittedly really sweet, and that's why we rank him as high as we do. And we also have to shout out Octavio real quick. He's basically Dale's go-to guy for all the stuff he can't ask Hank to do. In other words, he's a criminal for hire. A very, very low-ranking criminal. I mean, I guess he's technically making a living and being a loyal friend at the same time, so that's nice. But there's not much else to say about him. Now, if your hair is suddenly blowing gracefully in the wind, it's probably because John Redcorn is up next. But maybe check to make sure your window's closed just in case though. John Redcorn needs no introduction. He's the ever-present healing guru of Nancy Gribble. Despite knowing that she's married, he's willing to help her night after night to be cured of her headaches. An honest guy, truly running an honest business. That said, he's best in small doses. John Redcorn is a character you like seeing here and there as a secondary cast member, but who doesn't really do too much to carry a whole plot on his own. That said, his role in the Dale Gribble character concept, in which the most paranoid conspiracy theorist completely overlooks the most obvious conspiracy happening right in front of him, will never not be hilarious.
Honey, you want a beer?
Yes.
Yes. How did he know I wanted a beer?
Usually Hank's not too fond of hippies, but there are exceptions, like good old Appleseed. When Hank discovers that organic food is, wait for it, good, he naturally teams up with Appleseed to get his go-to food co-op running better than ever. Unfortunately, when Megalomart buys the co-op out, Appleseed has to flee with the cows Hank bought so they'll be able to graze as cows should, and he even names one after Hank. Appleseed is a good guy, and an example of the show being able to portray people very different from Hank in a positive light. Rounding out this category, how about a quick shout out for Hank's coworkers? Joe Jack, Enrique, Donna, Roger, they're all pretty decent, well-mannered people. Well, except Donna, in that one MySpace episode in particular. Or Enrique, in that episode where he basically stalks the Hills and tries to become part of their family. But they all have their likable traits, so it's nice to see them occasionally get bigger roles so they can show their stuff. Personally, I like Enrique. He's a loving family man, and while he gets a bit clingy, it's hard not to sympathize with the poor guy. But now it's time to move one step closer to the best of the best. This is the A tier. And first up we have Gilbert Dauterive. He's the last remaining male of the Dauterive bloodline next to Bill, but the family name will live on, if for no other reason than because of how absolutely iconic this man is.
And sinners always look good.
He only appears in a couple episodes, but his weirdly sultry manner of speaking makes him a fun character to see no matter how short of a time it's for. He's kind of like if you gave Bruce from Family Guy a more prominent role, which honestly is actually a pretty good idea. This might be controversial, but next up is Buck Strickland. Buck is a total sleazebag, and we wouldn't blame you if you expected him to fall much lower on our list. But even if he had no redeeming moments, which is pretty close to true, admittedly, Buck still makes for a great antagonist. He's like an even more shady, underhanded Mr. Krabs, a guy who abuses the loyalty of his loyal employees without any regard for their safety. He throws Hank under the bus for absolutely nothing, and for most of the show, he's basically Mr. Krabs without his, admittedly few, good qualities. But the season 13 Propane Convention episode actually gave him some credit. He's still being a total scumbag for most of the episode, but at the end of it, he uses that dirtbag shtick of his for good.
Then we gonna fix things the way fellas like us fix things.
When Hank gets in trouble for giving a drunken, vomit-filled introduction to Buck on stage, Buck uses the higher-ups' poor impulse control against him. He manages to lure them into a room full of prostitutes, blackmailing them with the threat of exposing the ordeal to their wives, unless they forgive Hank. He's a dirty, sleazy guy, but he's both entertaining and not without his very few redemptive moments. That said, him trying to frame Hank for murder and then laughing it off is maybe one of the darker moments in the show when you really think about it. Now we have arguably the most important of the Hill clan, Ladybird. What is a man without his loyal steed? Ladybird is a good dog, which shouldn't even need saying, but what really elevates her so high up is just how much Hank loves her. There's something needlessly funny about a man who's famously bad at expressing himself, throwing all that stoicism away because he loves his dog so much.
Ladybird Hill, you're beautiful.
I mean, heck, when Bobby developed an allergy to dogs, Hank built Ladybird a dog mansion to live in. Then he straight up let Bobby live in it instead, so he wouldn't have to be apart from his dog. There's also the fact that Ladybird de-stressed Hank enough for his facilities to allow Bobby to be conceived. So for helping bring Bobby into the world, Ladybird gets a few extra points. Moving on to Connie, Bobby's literal girl next door. As Bobby's brief girlfriend and consistent second best friend, Connie is a loyal companion through and through. She isn't particularly funny or even all that interesting on her own, but it's refreshing to see a character be unapologetically good. Even when Bobby mistreats Connie, like in the Tid Pow episode, she still comes through for him at the end of the day, even if she has to make him sweat a bit first. Also, similarly to Bobby, she deals with a father who's overbearing about her interests and doesn't particularly understand her, which means she makes Con all the better of a character by proxy. And following Connie is her mother, Ming. You could more or less describe Ming as a less aggressively mean Con in terms of personality. But while that's kinda true, Ming is also surprisingly sympathetic at times. She's always there to stick up for her family when the situation demands it, and sometimes she even has a soft spot for her redneck neighbors. We can't forget that she and Dale ended up becoming friends when she used his gun club to help the couple get into Nine Rivers at last. Sure, she briefly betrayed their loyalty, but she came back around by saving them all from prison and staying in their good graces. It's a surprisingly touching moment and shows that she has more to her than meets the eye. And before we move on, can we also talk about how supportive she is of Con? You would think that she would be super materialistic and leave him at the first sign of trouble, but Ming sticks with Con through just about everything. Nearing the end of the A tier is Bobby's best friend, Joseph Gribble. Son of Dale Gribble and John Redcorn, Joseph is a decent source of comic relief, much like his dad. What boosts Joseph up so high is him being such a loyal friend. Being a popular, skilled quarterback, you'd think there'd be some tension between him and Bobby. But Joseph is fairly consistent in his loyalty as a friend. Of course, he can also be very, very creepy, which is typical of a teenager going through puberty and being raised by Dale Gribble. It's balanced out by other people calling him out for being weird, even if it's the show itself framing him as such. Next up, we have Stuart Dooley. He's funny. Now, moving on.
That took courage.
Landing just outside of our S tier and the top 10 is Lucky. Ever since he slipped on PP at the Costco and got that $53,000 settlement, Lucky thought that he couldn't get any luckier. But as it turned out, he'd go on to marry Luann, acting as a loving husband and father to her child, as well as a pretty decent guy all around. Yeah, he can take advantage of legal systems here and there, but Lucky's heart is genuinely in the right place usually. It's never brought into question how much he loves Luann, and how he'll put her above anything and everything else at the end of the day, which earns him a pretty honorable placement on our list. He might be a redneck stereotype on the surface, but his heart is no less golden than the PP he slipped on for that settlement. And without further ado, we've reached the best of the best. This is the S tier for the characters who gave a propane-powered 110%. And we're not done with controversial placements yet, because 3-time Substitute Teacher of the Year Peggy Hill is first up. Fan opinions on Peggy are very, very mixed. She's one of the most widely disliked characters in the series, particularly after Season 3. It's a widely accepted theory that after the season finale, when she survived a skydiving accident that put her in a full body cast, she suffered brain damage that led to her becoming the narcissist we all know and some of us love. Admittedly, there's a lot of moments where Peggy gets pretty grating. Her ego can cross the line from funny to downright insufferable at times, the worst of which has to be the episode where she teaches Lucky false information for his GED test, for basically no reason beyond pettily believing Luann is too good for him. But while moments like that make her pretty unlikable, she more than makes up for it with her sense of humor.
All I know is, if you had come in to find me chewing up the couch, you would not be nearly so forgiving.
Seriously, say what you will about Peggy, but she is genuinely one of the funniest characters in the show. How somebody can be so incompetent yet so confident.
I am what the magazines call a superwoman.
I like Superwoman.
Oh, Bobby, thank you.
So well-meaning yet so harmful is beyond me. She smuggled crack into prisons, nearly caused a citywide mustard gas incident, and unknowingly became a foot fetish adult film star. And all of these incidents were completely by accident, all because of how naive she is. You could easily list everything Peggy's done and frame her as a supervillain, but what makes her so funny is that she's genuinely trying to do good most of the time. All of that is in combination with the fact that Peggy is a genuinely loving, albeit flawed, mother, wife, and aunt. She is not perfect, but she has enough good points that outshine her flaws, which makes her both more likable and somehow even funnier.
In your face, boy!
I remember finding Peggy kind of insufferable when I watched the show as a kid, but when I rewatched as an adult, I found her absolutely hilarious. Now, from the meanest character in the show to arguably the sweetest, next we have Luann Platter. Oh, sweet, sweet Luann. I'll admit that in the last couple of seasons, she could occasionally border on obnoxious, and maybe even a bit materialistic, but that's nowhere near enough to detract from how sincere and sweet her character is. Luann has been hurt deeply by her parents, and when she takes the spotlight, you can tell just how hard it is for her to be a functioning adult. Nonetheless, she always tries her best. You can laugh at all the dumb mix-ups Luann has over the course of the series.
I am a proud, ignorant woman, and no one is going to change that.
But you also just feel like cheering her on because it's never brought into doubt that Luann is at least trying. While Bobby is the most blatant foil to Hank's character, Luann might be an even better one. She's young, impressionable, naive, and always wants to assume the best in people, which leads to her being taken advantage of more often than not. Whether it's by rude college housemates or creepy old pig dudes. Seriously, what the hell was that episode?
Oh, you mean sex?
No.
When Luann gets a win, it just makes you want to cheer her on more. And that makes her a breath of fresh air basically anytime she shows up. Okay, man, Dangle, tell you what, man, talking about just outside the top 5, man, Dangle Boomhauer.
Sir, you are going to have to speak more slowly. I cannot understand you.
Now, I ain't gonna lie to you, man, that old Boomhauer, straight up good old friend, man. Talking about, Dangle, man's best friend. Ain't talking about no dog, man, Dangle Boomhauer. Dang old gentleman talking ride or die friend, man. But let's move on to Hank's next neighbor, Bill Dauterive. Bill, oh boy, if Luann is a character you'll cheer on whenever she gets a win, Bill is a character who will make you hold on to that win because you know that it won't last long. Bill is an oddly realistic portrayal of depression. The guy is portrayed as an absolute loser, yet in a surprisingly sensitive way. He's fat, bald, unpopular, his wife divorced him, etc., etc. That obviously makes him the butt of the joke more often than not, but Bill still has a lot of moments where he gets to shine in his own right.
Look at me, Momo. I'm fat. And I'm old, and every day I'm just gonna wake up fatter and older.
Bill is a genuinely kind man who does everything he can to care about people, even when they take advantage of him. Whether they're deadbeat dropouts trying to guilt him into being their father figure, or a group of rehab patients who need a place to live, Bill can be counted on wherever he's needed, and he's a pretty decent friend to boot. But what makes Bill work so well is that while he's lovable enough to care about him and to root for his success, he's also just creepy enough to where you can laugh at him here and there, particularly in regard to his very weird flirtation with Peggy. It's always funny to see him get his comeuppance for that, and it's nice to see that slowly become less of a prominent trait of his later on. We see much more of Bill's good side than his bad side, and at the end of the day, I just hope the revival sees him being happy once again. Landing in our top 5 is the man who's killed 50 men. Cotton Hill is up next.
You must be very proud, Mr. Hill.
Of course I am. I killed 50 men.
He's every bit as controversial as Peggy, if not more so. Aside from being a verbally abusive father to Hank, Cotton is also a war criminal, a womanizer, a deadbeat dad, and all-around angry lunatic. But with all that said, it's incredible that the show manages to write him in an occasionally sympathetic light. Whether it's humanizing his trauma from the war and how it affects him, or highlighting his redeeming qualities, the show somehow manages to make Cotton both a complete jackass and a genuinely human character. Probably the best aspect of Cotton's character is his relationship with his grandson Bobby. They get along well, and in one episode, Cotton even takes the fall for Bobby when his reputation was on the line after eating all the lutefisk at Reverend Stroop's potluck. Cotton is a massive jerk, but he knows he's a massive jerk, so he's more than willing to become the man with the terrible smell if it means keeping Bobby out of infamy.
Everybody already hates me, but Bobby, he's just a child. He's got his whole life ahead of him.
And like Peggy, or as he calls her,
Hank's wife,
even when Cotton is being absolutely horrific as a father and human being in general, he manages to be hilarious all the time. Unlike Peggy, however, Cotton has the advantage of not really being more hateable than usual in any particular episode. Probably because the show establishes from the get-go that he is just a jerk, and he never tries to prove that fact wrong. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take, but landing just outside of our top 3 is Khan. Khan is the perfect example of a lovable jerk character. He's more or less the Squidward of Rainy Street, a guy who thinks he's way better than everyone around him and lets them know it.
if I crash into your puny pickup, you get flattened like pancake.
Seriously, the petty ways Khan insults and harasses his neighbors are as hilarious as they are often creepy. Even then, sometimes he's nice enough to treat them to a free concert.
Oh, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind. Hey, Mickey, Mickey, don't break my phone.
What makes Khan stand out so much is that while he's often an elitist jerk, when the chips are down, he's always there for his family. Heck, he's actually way more similar to Hank than you would think. Both of them are stuck in their ways, insist on raising their kids the way they think is best, but often push them away. But like Hank, Khan always comes around and shows that his family comes first. He pushes Connie because he wants her to have success, and when he realizes he's pushing her too hard, he does whatever he can to support her.
All your mother and I ever want for you is to be happy.
In one episode, he thinks Connie is suicidal after breaking up with Bobby, and responds by organizing constant hangout sessions. Khan is a real jerk a lot of the time, but he struggles with discrimination, manic depression, and the fear that his family will never have the luxurious life that they escaped from Laos to have. He's not a perfect man, but he's a man who loves his family through a lot of hardships. And if you ask us, that is worth a lot. Now, moving into our top 3, the bronze medal of greatness has to go to Bobby Hill. He's got a heart of gold and the confidence of a god, which makes sense considering he's literally the Dalai Lama.
Who wants to fall in love?
But Bobby is more than a mere Buddhist spiritual leader. He's a kid who's always open to new opportunities and lifestyles.
I I'm not single. I'm available.
Taking everything with an open mind thanks to the love and support of his dad. The boy may not be right, but he knows his parents love him anyway, which makes him confident enough to try new things all the time. But Bobby is just as kind to others as he is to himself, if not more so. A great example of this comes from the episode Peggy's Magic Sex Feet, in which Bobby encourages Peggy that she shouldn't feel ashamed of her big feet, and delivers a pretty iconic little speech.
What are you gonna do?
One of the main reasons King of the Hill is so great is because it has genuine heart, and more often than not, that heart comes from Bobby Hill. He makes big, hilarious mistakes, he's constantly misguided, but he learns from them, and he becomes more self-assured and compassionate as a result. And if there's one more important thing to the show than heart, it's comedy, and Bobby is still pretty hilarious. But I don't think anyone's gonna complain about Dale Gribble taking the silver medal for best character. Honestly, Dale is such an iconic King of the Hill character. The man is an unhinged lunatic who comes up with the most borderline psychotic schemes, conspiracy theories, etc. Yet he does them with such pure intentions that you can't really hate him even on his worst days. Take the episode The Trouble with Gribbles, for instance. From the outside, you'd think Dale was just being an insufferable ass to his wife, but he's actually scheming to make a case for suing the tobacco industry to pay for a facelift that she herself wanted. Dale is more of a family man than Nancy could ever deserve. From refusing to cheat on her despite a blatant opportunity with his idol, to raising Joseph like his own son, even if, as we know, Joseph is an alien.
Joseph's real father is
Nancy loves you.
an alien.
Dale is a loyal friend, husband, and father who might screw his loved ones over, but he'll do everything in his power and then some to make amends. The episode King of the Anthill sees Dale literally covered head to toe and bitten simultaneously by thousands of fire ants to save Bobby's life. Dale may be insane and selfish, but deep down he has a good heart. But what really boosts Dale to the silver is just, well, he's just too damn funny.
So long, suckers.
Whether he's coming up with the most wild mental gymnastics you've ever heard, or being blissfully unaware of his wife cheating on him with one of his best friends, even down to being convinced that said friend is gay,
John Redcorn's gay, and I've been friends with him for years.
Dale is a genuinely hilarious character, and amazingly, that comic relief is never lost in the later seasons. Dale makes an already great show even better, and just like all the other departed voice actors, we'll never forget him thanks to that legendary performance by the late Johnny Hardwick. Finally, the gold medal of greatness goes to the Mac Daddy of Heimlich County himself, Hank Hill.
I am the Mac Daddy of Heimlich County. I play it straight up, yo.
A show can only be as strong as its main character, and thankfully for King of the Hill, Hank Hill is an absolute legend. He does it all. He sells propane accessories, he has a family, who he is a gem to, by the way. Seriously, with Hank and Bobby being so incredibly different from one another, you'd be shocked just how sweet and wholesome their relationship is. Hank always does his best to support Bobby, but he also knows when to put his foot down and stop him from doing something that will get him hurt or bullied. All of that is on top of Hank himself having Cotton as a father. The fact that he ended up being such a great dad is nothing short of a miracle. But the best thing about Hank's character is that he's not perfect. Nowhere near it, actually. Hank is easily turned off by new cultures and alternative lifestyles, but despite all that, he always treats people with a certain level of respect and dignity. When Hank is in the wrong, the show lets you know, and it gives him the opportunity to learn and grow as a person. He's a good man and a flawed man. And on top of this, some of the situations that Hank Hill finds himself in are some of the funniest plot lines I've seen in any comedy. Having a straight arrow, uptight character like Hank thrown into situations that force him to be confronted with something new, weird, or different just works so well.
We need more of this weed and more of this dude.
And he always ends up coming out of the situations a little bit more enlightened himself. But the best ones, in my opinion, are the ones where his ignorance or naivete stop him from even knowing what he's doing. Like the time he accidentally becomes a pimp, or the time he accidentally bought crack because he thought it was fishing bait. Hank Hill is arguably the best straight arrow character in all of comedy.
If there was only one way you could describe King of the Hill, it would be slice of life. There are no grand adventures or huge battles, it's just a show about people living their lives and the relationships they have with each other, and that's why we love it. But as simple as life is in Arlen, Texas, it doesn't stop antagonistic and even low-key evil characters from creeping in every once in a while. But which King of the Hill characters happen to fall on the low end of the morality spectrum, and which are the worst of the worst? When we say villain, we mean antagonist. Like we said, King of the Hill is simple and grounded, so you're not going to find any supervillains or world conquerors. For this list, along with focusing on morality and actions, we're also going to be focusing on how much trouble they put other characters through. Naturally, those characters who had multiple appearances or who committed multiple crimes will receive a higher ranking. With that out of the way, we're going to be starting with our least evil characters and working our way down to the truly evil villains. Starting with our least evil character, we have Dale Gribble. Dale is not a bad guy. In fact, he's just as often a protagonist as he is an antagonist. However, with how many crimes he's committed and how often he's causing trouble for his friends, we felt we couldn't not put him somewhere on this list. When looking at Dale's rap sheet, it's concerning how long it is, with crimes ranging from minor to major. To start, Dale is the type of guy to act first and ask for permission later. He's constantly trying to borrow Hank's tools without asking, and even digs a friendship tunnel under Hank's home, causing the floor underneath it to collapse. Dale is also a schemer and can be pretty dishonest at times. We all know about his Rusty Shackleford alias, which is not only an example of him trying to get out of consequences, but also an example of identity theft. There was also the time he planted ants on Hank's lawn after Hank fired him. Most of the time though, Dale is a huge jerk. He becomes a terror to his neighborhood when he gets a suit of armor, seeing himself as invincible and thus able to act without consequences. In fact, anytime Dale gets a little power, it goes straight to his head. As bad as Dale can be, he can also be good. For all the times he's been a jerk or sneaky or irresponsible, he's also been noble, brave, and selfless. For that reason alone, we just had to rank him as least evil. Slightly above Dale, we have Gordon Huskin. Gordon and his family were part of an international house swap program, temporarily moving into Boomhauer's house for the summer. Contrary to the popular stereotype, Gordon and his family weren't exactly polite or neighborly. Both Gordon and his wife Maureen are condescending, even when Hank and Peggy are just trying to be neighborly. Maureen insults Peggy's gift basket and new lawn furniture, while Gordon insults Alamo beer and disrespects Boomhauer's mug, leaving it in a bush when he leaves the Hills party. Tensions further rise when Gordon calls the police on Hank and Peggy, filing an unnecessary noise complaint. Throughout the episode, Gordon remains stubborn as the friction continues between him and Hank, culminating in drunk lawn mowing. But even after Hank tries to make things right and gets Gordon out of jail, Gordon and his family don't seem to show much appreciation for Hank's sacrifice. Gordon even gives one last subtle Texas jab on his way out. Talk about rude. Though we acknowledge that Hank didn't make the situation any better, Gordon was the one who started the initial conflict. Still, there are much worse crimes than being a bad neighbor. Up next is Ted Wasanaesong. For someone as rich and successful as Ted, it's only natural that he would tend to use that influence in sometimes unscrupulous ways. While Ted acknowledges Khan's admiration for him, he usually doesn't show that same respect towards him in return. In one instance, Ted even tried to use his influence over Khan to get him to stop being a banana and instead live a more traditional Laotian lifestyle.
You've become what is known as a banana.
This culminated in Ted trying to get Khan to join a guerrilla squad to fight the communist regime in Laos, where Khan likely would have been injured, captured, or killed. In another episode, Ted tried to use both Khan and Hank to get a famous golf tournament at Nine Rivers Country Club. Although he was willing to offer many perks to both of them, it was also obvious that Ted didn't care about being actual friends with them, not even paying attention enough to know what Hank's job was. Later on, he and his wife tried to trick Peggy into selling kitchen appliances in order to get out of their contract with Cozy Kitchens. This once again shows Ted as trying to use someone else for their own gain, with his wife apparently sharing the same tendencies. And Ted can be reckless, like when he tried to build a McMansion on Rainey Street without any regards to how such a massive and poorly built home would affect its neighbors. Add in the fact that he lets his son be a bully to students like Bobby, and Ted doesn't seem like a guy worthy of all the admiration and respect Khan gives him. Next is Anthony Page. CPS workers are not bad people, far from it. Unfortunately, Kenneth is an example of a person who puts his own opinions and beliefs before actual evidence. For most, he's gullible and irrational for how he reacts towards the people he perceives as victims. In the pilot episode, Anthony's brought in after Bobby gets a black eye from getting hit by a baseball. From this event, a town-wide rumor gets blown completely out of proportion, and Hank is accused of being abusive towards his son. When Anthony checks out the situation, it's clear that he's already decided Hank is guilty and doesn't give Hank much of a chance to explain himself. He even accuses Hank of being abusive to Peggy. As the episode goes on, Anthony continues trying to take Bobby away without any real evidence, only using the impressions Bobby and Joseph do of Hank as proof. Despite this, there was still a chance of Anthony taking Bobby away. That is, until his boss asked him if he actually spoke to Bobby's baseball coach to confirm Hank's story, which he didn't. This is another example of Anthony only relying on his own opinions rather than facts. Not the best quality for a social worker. While the pilot is his biggest role, Anthony also plays a brief antagonistic role in the episode Junkie Business, where he helps Leon Petard maintain employment at Strickland Propane, where he claims that Leon's addiction to drugs falls under a disability. Like a lot of bureaucrats, Anthony is someone who's just annoying to deal with and causes more problems rather than fixing them. Next is the very frustrating Caleb. We're sure a lot of you may be upset that he isn't lower on our list, but let us explain. When he and his family first moved in, Caleb actually wasn't that bad of a kid. Maybe a little annoying, but it was all typical little kid behavior. However, once Caleb realized he could easily get a rise out of Hank, it didn't take him long to go from relatively innocent to actively taunting him. It gets to the point of Caleb being destructive. He shoves a hose through Hank's mail slot, which would have caused a lot of water damage if Hank hadn't spotted it right away. And then he purposely rides his bike on Hank's lawn to wreck it. So Caleb turned out to be a brat. This was mostly the fault of his parents, not being willing to discipline him or give him boundaries. In that sense, his actions can't completely be blamed on him. We should also point out that once Caleb's dad actually stepped up and told him to stop, Caleb obeyed. For these reasons, we can't place him any lower. Next is Liz Strickland. It's hard not to sympathize with Ms. Liz, considering who she's married to. When Buck's cheating finally becomes too much for her, Liz takes it upon herself to take everything from Buck, including Strickland Propane. Wanting revenge on her husband, Liz used her new authority to control Hank. At one point, Liz even tried to seduce Hank into a romantic scenario when she lied about her hot tub having a propane issue. It's hypocritical when you think about it. She was only acting out because she was tired of Buck cheating, yet she tried to get Hank to cheat on Peggy with her. It's messed up. Her new position also gave her a chance to get revenge on Buck's mistress, Debbie. It should be noted, however, that Liz was never cruel or abusive to Debbie. At worst, she would assign Debbie the worst jobs, which is a fair punishment.
Yes, but your butt belongs to me.
While we disapprove of her trying to hook up with Hank for the sake of getting back at her husband, this was one bad call that she still apologized for. Compared to some of the other characters on this list, Liz did a lot less, and we feel we can cut her some slack. Next is Strickland's main rival, M.F. Thatherton. The M.F. stands for, you know what it is.
The MF stands for
My friend.
Formerly an employee of Strickland Propane, Thatherton was an example of disloyalty by deciding to strike out on his own behind his boss's back, something Hank disapproved of. As his own boss, Thatherton can be underhanded and untrustworthy in his attempts to get a sale. Because he only sees his customers as a means of making money, Thatherton says whatever he needs to in order to dazzle someone enough for them to buy, even if it's a lie. He engages in a price war with Strickland to have the lowest propane prices in Ireland, though he will make a deal and illegally work together with his competition if it means bigger profits for him. Essentially, he's the complete opposite of a salesman, as honest and transparent as Hank is. While he is as bad, perhaps even worse, than Buck Strickland, Thatherton isn't a main antagonist often, only having a few main roles. He's also a huge liar and con man, not exactly a criminal genius. As such, we felt we couldn't place him much lower. Next, we have Patch Boomhauer. Acting as a foil to his older brother, Patch is a womanizer and sleazy. Even after being engaged to Boomhauer's former girlfriend, Patch cozies up to female entertainers on the night of his bachelor party. While Boomhauer seems to respect his dates, Patch doesn't seem to have much at all, judging by how he treats Luann when all she does is walk up to him. He can also be dishonest, letting Boomhauer take the fall for him and claiming that Boomhauer hired the party's entertainment. Patch only reveals the truth later on when he thinks it can benefit him. While he only appeared in one episode, Patch made it very clear why he and his older brother don't get along. Acting as the stereotypical dumb hillbilly, we have Jimmy Witchard. Jimmy's loud, angry, and above all else, stupid. As the manager of the Arlen Speedway concession stand, he often drove his young co-workers away with his ridiculous demands and refusal to give them proper payment. When Bobby tried to be the best employee he could be, it didn't take Jimmy very long to take advantage of Bobby's work ethic. But even when Bobby was doing things right, Jimmy offered little in praise and was verbally abusive towards him. In addition, he had Bobby do awful jobs that no kid should do, like forcing him to wear a hot dog costume in the hot sun, resulting in Bobby getting pelted with trash. Jimmy even tried to force Bobby to run across a busy racetrack so he wouldn't have to wait for a drink. While this is his only major role, it's still memorable. Because he was selfish and stupid enough to let a 12-year-old boy nearly be killed, we felt we had to put him fairly low down. In terms of ex-wives, Lenore was one of the worst. While she and Bill were still married, Lenore cheated on him several times before leaving him during the holidays. As Bill said, she didn't even leave him a Dear John letter, having so little concern for him that she refused to even say goodbye or give him closure. Each time Bill tried to reach out, she would reject him, even when he was desperate to hear from her. The only time she responded was when she learned that Bill was happy and moving on. When Bill starts to date former Governor Ann Richards, Lenore tries to win Bill back. Whether this is out of jealousy or because she's petty enough to ruin Bill's first healthy relationship in years, it's still awful. While she may make Bill feel hopeful that his wife has finally returned, in the end, Lenore makes it obvious that once Ann is out of the picture, she'll go back to not caring about Bill at all, and that she was only ever pretending to care. It's one thing to break someone's heart, but to go out of your way to ruin a person's future relationships, that's a whole new level of cruelty. Next on our list, we have the not-so-holy Junie Harper. We all know those types of people who will use their religions as a means of power and control over others, and Junie Harper fits that type to a T. In her only appearance, Junie tried to ban Halloween in Arlen, claiming that it was a satanic holiday. Despite this claim being completely unfounded, she still cancels the holiday and gets a chance to hold a Hallelujah house for the town's kids. The house in question is essentially filled with propaganda, with its displays promoting things like abstinence and anti-evolution beliefs. Throughout the episode, she also tries to turn Luann and later Bobby against Hank, crossing the line from concerned individual to active antagonist, one that can't seem to stop pushing her beliefs onto others. She even goes as far as to say that Hank and Peggy are promoting anti-Christian values, which is out of line. Overall, Junie Harper is a perfect example of an extremist, caring more about the control she has over others and getting rid of things she doesn't personally like than the actual core meaning of her religion. Starting our actual criminals, we have Bill's so-called son, Wally. During one Christmas, Bill decides he wants to be Santa for as many kids as possible. This goes beyond buying a gift for children in need and results in Bill turning his home into Santa's workshop. Once the holidays are over and the kids stop coming, Bill runs into Wally, a teenage slacker that quickly mooches off Bill's generosity. He tries to get money, cigarettes, and beer out of Bill, who start to see Wally as a surrogate son. Things get worse when Wally gives Bobby and the other neighborhood kids beer and steals Hank's belt sander to give to Bill, proving himself to be both a bad influence and a thief. Wally's stint as Bill's so-called son ends when he gets arrested for stealing both Bill's car and credit card. Afterwards, Wally enlists in the army, thanks to Bill convincing the judge that that would be better than jail. Though his crimes are minor, they're still awful. It's also implied that had it not been for Hank stepping in and Bill standing up to him, Wally would have taken Bill for all he was worth. We can only hope that being in the army straightened him out, for both his and Bill's sake.
He never had faith in me either, but at least he had a motorcycle.
Yet another so-called redneck, we're ranking Elvin Mackleston next. We first see Elvin in The Redneck on Rainy Street, where he tries to convince a frustrated Con to ditch his responsibilities and live a more free lifestyle. Although Elvin was just trying to help out, he did it in a very destructive way. It was his advice that nearly caused Con and Min to lose their home. At one point, he even tries to convince Con to rob a CD store with them, not caring about the consequences. He also proved to have very little actual respect for Con, making fun of him after Min said she'd had enough of the redneck lifestyle.
Oh hell, this is ridiculous.
In addition to all of this, Elvin has been violent when he threatened Kevin, a 15-year-old boy that Luann decided to go to prom with, for the sake of his friend Lucky. Elvin even says that he and Mud Dauber will kill Kevin if he goes to the dance with Luann, and makes good on his word when they crash the high school prom. We're sure that Elvin has done more, but without many more actual scenes to go off of, we can't put him any lower. Next is King Philip. It's easy for people to let a title or crown go to their head, even if that crown is plastic and that title only applies to a small Renaissance fair. The so-called King Philip is a perfect example of this. Striving for historical accuracy in his Renaissance fair, Philip treats all of his female employees terribly. He underpays them, forces them to do back-breaking labor in uncomfortable corsets, and has them put in a literal stockade when they get out of line. He also threatens to fire them if they try to fight back, a punishment that none of the workers can afford. There's being a terrible boss, and then there's being a tyrant. Thankfully, by the end of the episode, King Philip gets his comeuppance when the women sue him for all the labor laws he broke, resulting in him losing his Renaissance fair and his so-called kingdom once and for all. Next is Cotton Hill. Yeah, you knew he had to be somewhere. Honestly, where do we even start? Cotton is pretty much the textbook example of an emotionally abusive husband and father. He was unsupportive and disrespectful to both of his wives, and the way he treated Hank was even worse. Even when Hank is an adult, Cotton puts him down and gives even less respect to Peggy, who he only calls Hank's wife. Throughout his life, he was consistently a chauvinistic, violent, abusive, and intolerant character. Cotton even tried to pass on some of his more misogynistic traits to Bobby, proving to be a terrible influence on him. For his worst moments, Cotton once locked Bobby in a cell for 3 days while they were at a military academy, trying to break his spirit and toughen him up. During another point in the series, Cotton tried to use Hank as a fall guy when he tried to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Well, I suppose you're sucker punch.
As awful as Cotton has been, he has had several moments throughout the series where he showed his softer side. Despite our earlier examples, Cotton has loved and cared about Bobby, as well as his other son, GH. When Bobby accidentally burnt down the church, Cotton took the blame after Bobby revealed the truth to him. Despite their hatred of each other, he helped Peggy regain the ability to walk after her skydiving accident, and he once told Hank that out of the two of them, Hank was the better dad. Cotton was even once willing to take his own life if it meant he could provide for his family through the life insurance money. It should also be noted that as emotionally and verbally abusive as Cotton is, he never crossed that line into being physical. He even seemed to be appalled when he thought Hank put Peggy into a full body cast. We acknowledge that it's a low bar, but it's one that Cotton clears regardless. Up next is Hoyt Platter. When Hoyt makes his grand return to Arlen, it's obvious that when it comes to being a parent to his daughter Luann, he's about as bad as his ex-wife. It's revealed that Hoyt has been in prison for several years, and though he may claim that he wants to go straight, old habits die hard. Not only is he a terrible father to Luann and a bad influence on Bobby and Lucky, but he robs a diner only days after coming to Arlen. He then convinces Lucky to take the fall for him, not regretting his choice, despite the pain it puts Luann through. Later, he steals money from Peggy to buy drugs and accuses his pregnant daughter of buying the drugs when he's arrested yet again. As awful as Hoyt is, we put him above his ex, Leanne, for a couple of reasons. Hoyt may be a thief and a liar, but he's never violent. Also, while it may only be a small amount, he still seems to care about Luann more than Leanne does. Though it's not enough to keep him out of the lower half of our ranking, it's enough to earn him a couple of points. Entering our bottom 10, we have Buck Strickland. In terms of horrible, womanizing bosses and just horrible people in general, Buck is a definition of one. While he may have been a confident businessman, Buck's vices have gotten the better of him over the years. He's a cheater, a womanizer, and can be found at the local strip club instead of his office. Buck also follows less than honest business practices if he thinks he's able to get away with it, like when he engaged in working together with his competition. Despite Hank's loyalty to Strickland, Buck isn't always loyal to him. He once tried to frame Hank for the murder of Debbie Grunn to throw suspicion off both himself and his wife. Granted, he also tried to pin the blame on himself when it looked like pinning the blame on Hank wouldn't work, all for the sake of protecting Liz. It was an action Hank understood and forgave him for, but it was one of his lowest moments.
Sorry about that whole frame up there, Tano. I was under a lot of stress.
Buck was also a terrible influence on Bobby in the episode where Bobby became his golf caddy. He tries to instill the lesson that it's only cheating if you get caught into Bobby, and later puts Bobby in danger when he takes him to Arkansas for a night. Hank was completely fed up with Buck in this episode. What keeps Buck from going any lower is that while he has tried to throw Hank under the bus a couple of times, he's also stood by Hank and helped him out. Buck acknowledges that his business is nothing without Hank and will do whatever he needs to keep him around. Up next, we have Barry Rollins. You know the Joker's old saying of how one bad day can turn an ordinary person into a life of crime? Well, that's what happened to Barry Rollins, albeit on a smaller scale. According to Barry, he was someone who had been pushed around most of his life. This misfortune came to a head when his wallet was stolen by Hank, who believed that the wallet was his and that Barry was the thief. Tired of being a victim, Barry takes out all of his frustrations on Hank, even as Hank is just trying to return his wallet. He tries to bash Hank, Bill, and Boomhauer's heads in with an aluminum baseball bat and chases them all the way to Bazoom's. Barry continues to threaten and attack them, even getting physical with a few of the waitresses that get in his way. Although we do feel sorry for him, we can't deny that he's unstable, seemingly getting a thrill out of being a revenge-seeking vigilante. Given that he's one of the few King of the Hill characters that committed attempted murder, we had to give him a low ranking.
Please! I'm tired of being a victim!
Up next, we're ranking Coach Sowers. Earning the nickname Sour Coach Sowers was known for being strict and serious, especially when it came to football. When Hank asked him to turn the middle school football team into a team of winners, Sowers refused to give the kids any leeway despite their ages. He applied brutal, relentless practices meant for high school students rather than middle school students, leading many players to quit and join the soccer team. We can't blame the kids for this, given how often Sowers' training methods resulted in the kids either getting injured or eating mud. Sowers didn't care about these issues, being verbally abrasive and always telling kids to have a salt tablet, regardless of how much pain they were in. His coaching methods were finally taken too far for even Hank to take, when Hank found him chasing the team around his car for motivation, threatening to hit them if they weren't fast enough. This guy's nuts. What makes him even worse is that these were close to the same methods he used back in his high school coaching days. In another episode, Hank and the others talked about how Coach Sowers used to give them go pills, aka horse crank. According to Bill, these pills were strong enough that when he broke his leg during a game, he didn't realize it for 2 days. So, while Sowers may have never been arrested for a crime during the show or during his coaching career, it's very obvious to anyone that he was a danger to young athletes, and probably society. We're gonna have Alabaster just outside our bottom 5. Given his career, it should be obvious why Alabaster is this high. Being from Oklahoma City, he came down to Arlen when he thought Hank had stolen Tammy from him and was willing to fight him to get her back. Given how confident Alabaster is and the influence that he has in Oklahoma City, we can assume that he's used to threatening people and has a habit of shaking people down for cash. When Hank refuses to give up Tammy, Alabaster chases them and tries to ram them off the road, running a red light in the process.
He ran a red. You can't do that.
That last bit may seem minor compared to everything else, but Hank sees it as a big offense. Ultimately, despite Tammy's claims that Alabaster can mess a guy like Hank up, it doesn't take much for Alabaster to back down. For this, we can't put him lower, although he certainly does enough crime, both implied and on-screen, to earn this spot. Several notches below her ex-husband, we have Leanne Platter. While Hoyt might have been selfish and uncaring, Leanne not only took selfishness to a new level, but she was also violent. In case you need a reminder, Leanne was sent to jail after stabbing Hoyt with a fork. After that, she was ordered by court not to drink. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for her to give in to temptation and for her alcoholism to cause her to neglect her motherly duties. She was verbally and physically abusive to Bill shortly after they started dating. Her anger issues reached a breaking point when, after Luann's then boyfriend Buckley insulted her, she threatened to stab him with, what else, a fork. While Peggy was able to fight her off, Leanne abandoned her daughter once again, stealing Bill's truck in the process. Leanne shows no remorse for any of her awful actions, not caring about the pain, physical or otherwise, that she inflicts on others, and thus more than deserves a low spot on our list. Next, we're ranking former football player Willie Lane. Forever known for blocking a kick in a Super Bowl, Willie has let his star status go to his head. Although he started off friendly when he first moved on to Rainey Street, Willie quickly proved himself to be not only a bad neighbor, but destructive. When Khan complains about the noise his party's making, Willie cuts his phone line, and it just gets worse from there. From trying to ruin Khan's lawn as revenge, to keeping the entire neighborhood up with his parties, to destroying Hank's fence, Willie lets everyone know that he doesn't care about being a good neighbor. He uses his status as a football star to influence and manipulate the cops, and he eventually ends up punching Hank in the face. After this, we learn that Willie actually has 2 other assault charges. Not only is he an obnoxious jerk, but he's also a violent jerk. He has 0 good qualities, and the only reason why he isn't on the podium of evil is because our bottom 3 entries are even worse than him. Taking the bronze medal of evil is the entirety of Omega House. Because we have no idea who started Omega House, we felt that we had to put the entire group on our list, even if most of the members are victims themselves. Basically, Omega House is a cult disguised as a female sorority, brainwashing its members through a variety of means. This includes depriving them of protein, bathroom breaks, and contact with all friends and family, hazing, and forcing them to sell jams and jellies for the cult's profit. It's disturbing to see how the group takes in young women and strips them of their identity, leaving an impact on their victims even if they're eventually able to escape. Their method of brainwashing is messed up too, and we see how much it distresses Luann. Although the group is broken up, thanks to the power of stakes, and doesn't seem to have much of a negative impact on the rest of Arlen, we can still infer that the group caused plenty of mental damage to its victims while it was active. Also, Peggy and Luann were both nearly kidnapped and taken to a so-called retreat, when in actuality, they would have been taken into slavery on a jams and jellies ranch. That alone is more than enough to consider them pretty evil. For the silver medal of evil, we have Trip Larson, another character that we're sure you all knew was coming. It was only natural to include a character like him. Though originally charming, he seems to have something dark about him, something that only Peggy can sense. Throughout the episode, he subtly manipulates and influences people like Luann and Hank while subtly, and not so subtly, threatening Peggy. Once he has Luann in his home, he tries to control how she acts as well as both her clothes and her hair, even dyeing and cutting it while she's asleep. This all comes to a head when Trip tries to force Luann into marrying a stranger. If only he can recreate the happy Larson's Pork Products mascot family he saw throughout his childhood. When Luann refuses, he chases her down in a rage, with the 2 of them eventually ending up in a slaughterhouse. Trip then brings Luann up on the assembly line and decides that since she doesn't want to follow his plans, then they'll die together. While Luann is able to get to safety, Trip isn't so lucky. Now, we're sure you're all wondering why Trip isn't our most evil. While we acknowledge that Trip did awful things and is the darkest character from King of the Hill, we can't be sure that his actions were completely his own. It's implied that Trip suffered from several mental illnesses, and it's only when he's shocked by a prod that his mental stability is restored. He even asked why he was in a pig costume, further implying that he wasn't in his right mind, and that, had he survived, he likely wouldn't have been the same type of controlling and, let's face it, crazy man we saw throughout the episode. Because his actions weren't genuine, we felt that we couldn't give him the bottom spot. Finally, for our gold medal of evil, we have Debbie Grund. While she may have started off as Buck's mistress, Debbie soon revealed that she had a dark side and was willing to do much worse than just sleeping with a married man. When Strickland Propane is taken over by Liz, Debbie reveals that she never cared about Buck and was only sleeping with Buck to get special privileges at work. With Hank now being the closest thing she has to a boss that doesn't hate her, Debbie tries to seduce and force herself onto Hank. When Hank rejects her, this is when she puts her plans into action. First, Debbie tries to blackmail Hank into sleeping with her, threatening to tell Peggy that he cheated on her. What caused her to finally snap was when she saw the Stricklands had made up. Wanting to get her revenge once and for all, Debbie stole Ms. Liz's shotgun and hid in a dumpster behind Sugarfoot's with the intention of shooting both Buck and Liz, and possibly Hank and Peggy. Although she was unable to put her plans into action due to accidentally shooting herself, the murderous intent was there. Really, just the fact that she was even willing to go as far as murder, while also being a seductor and a cheater, was more than enough to declare her as the most evil King of the Hill villain. Before we go, we wanted to hand out some extra medals to the characters that fit them the best. We're giving the Darwin Medal to Jimmy Witchard. Need we remind you all that Jimmy apparently fried his brain by staring into the sun? The Lust Medal, of course, goes to Buck Strickland. It was a hard toss-up between him and Patch, but we felt Buck earned it in the end due to his many examples of cheating and sleeping around. We're giving the Wrath Medal to Barry Rollins. Not too many characters on this show threaten to murder someone else just for a simple mistake, and Barry certainly goes above and beyond with his wrath. The Greed Medal is gonna have to go to Hoyt Platter for being willing to steal money, time, and time again. Some guys just don't learn. We have to give the Pride Medal to Junie Harper for just how much she seems to see herself as the only righteous person in Arlen, and thus has the ability to judge everyone else for their so-called sins. The The sloth medal goes to Wally for just being such a mooch when it came to Bill's generosity and essentially being forced into a career path through the army. Lastly, we're giving the gluttony medal to Leanne Platter. Violently lashing out might have been one of her vices, but her addiction to alcohol was certainly her biggest. King of the Hill is grounded, certainly one of the more realistic cartoons that thrives in what is relatable, and that also goes for relationships. Every couple will remind you of one that you've met in real life, including the healthy and happy ones. But like real life, many of these couples have more than their fair share of problems. And today we want to know which couples in Arlen make the happiest couple and which ones are toxic. For this video, we'll be focusing on romantic relationships exclusively. And we'll be starting out with the healthiest relationship and working our way down to the most toxic. These are the healthy relationships. We're giving the top spot to the show's main couple, Hank and Peggy. Are they perfect? No, but it had to be them, because who in this show has a healthier relationship than Hank and Peggy? No one that we can think of. Hank can cause issues for his marriage via his lack of desire to communicate. However, he does his best and is good at putting up with Peggy's worst attributes, including her narcissistic tendencies.
No need for Bobby to get all bothered up.
Peggy also does a good job dealing with Hank's rigidity and unwillingness to step out of his comfort zone. Though Hank is a stick in the mud and Peggy is a narcissist, they complement each other well, each bringing out the best in each other and providing a good, stable home for their son. Their relationship is based on mutual respect, understanding, and support for each other's goals and desires. Hank and Peggy prove that the key to a happy marriage isn't avoiding issues altogether, rather it's about working together and rolling with the punches. For their ability to do that, we thought they deserved the top spot. Our silver medal of healthy goes to Lucky and Luann. This one might be controversial. On paper, this relationship shouldn't have worked out. Lucky's a lazy, unemployed, middle-aged man who has spent a lot of his life living off of money he won in a lawsuit. Luann is ditzy, naive, and immature. It sounds like their relationship should have been a one-off episode. However, the show does a good job of showing the audience that they are both willing to grow for the sake of their relationship survival. Lucky underwent several big moments of character growth in later seasons, becoming the kind of guy who has to wear a watch, something that he hates. He does this because he feels Luann deserves a guy like that. Luann didn't slack in this department either. She eventually gets a steady job working at Jack's and is understanding of Lucky's ideals that most people would consider silly or ridiculous. They had several hurdles to clear before settling for the long haul, but they did that and then some. That kind of dedication earns our second spot. For our next spot, we have everyone's least favorite neighbors, Con and Min. As much as we grow to love them, they are frustrating.
That psycho redneck is back.
They're stuck up, rude, and full of themselves. To their credit, they love each other. They even seem to be on the same page in most episodes. What helps their marriage is their shared dream of being successful, rich, and well-connected. It's shallow, but one they work together on. There have been instances where their marriage isn't holding together, such as when Con loses his job and abandons his family out of shame. However, the rare times they do have their issues, they always work it out. Alright guys, before you start with the Brad, actually, in the comment section, yeah, we know about the episode where Peggy implies that Min had a secret affair. However, those same people should remember that King of the Hill doesn't hold its continuity to a gold standard. The show has regularly given its audience contradicting information on several topics. The show's official canon is whatever the writers needed it to be at the time. It's not too far-fetched to think that this was a throwaway line intended to give Peggy the ability to blackmail men, especially since it's never mentioned before or after that scene. Despite having one of the healthier marriages in the show, it's still disgusting of Con to try and break up his mother, Lauma, and Bill. It's a shame this relationship was only a one-off episode because this was Bill's healthiest relationship, by far. When Con's mother comes around, she wants to keep working at her job as a maid, so she begins cleaning for a couple of the guys on Rainy Street, one of which is Bill. Since Bill's a slob, he gives her work, which overjoys her. Eventually, they form an emotional bond and begin dating. Issues arise though when Con tries to split them up, telling Bill that there is another man when in reality there isn't. This leads to them breaking up. However, after a pep talk from Hank, Bill realizes that he still loves Lauma and that he will fight for her. They end up together, and Con comes around in the end. They seemed really happy together. The only fault we can find they had together was that Con's lie could have come out a lot quicker and easier if the two had actually talked it out. However, communication issues are common for new couples, so we'll let it slide. It's really a shame this never worked out. However, the status quo demands Bill be miserable and lonely. From one Bill relationship to another, we have his relationship with Ann Richards. In this episode, Bill begins dating a former Texas state governor. The two are actually happy together. Eventually, though, Bill's ex-wife, Lenore, shows up, trying to renew her relationship with him. Bill ends up cheating on Ann with Lenore, leading to them breaking up. Now, normally, we wouldn't put any relationship that ends with cheating up this high. What makes this work, though, is Ann Richards. Rather than seeing Bill as a dog or womanizer, she sees that Bill is more akin to a puppet whose strings are pulled by Lenore. The former governor helps Bill realize that Lenore isn't really interested in him. The episode ends with Bill finally being free emotionally from his ex-wife, after he's been in this emotional rut for pretty much the whole series up to this point.
I just came by to wish you a happy birthday.
This relationship may not have ended well, but it's clear it was a net positive for both. That's it with our healthy relationships. We're now moving on to the gray area. These relationships aren't exactly healthy, but they're also far from the worst. At the top of this category, we have Bobby and Connie. This relationship, while on again, off again, isn't that bad. Both of them really care about each other and encourage each other's goals. However, the biggest issue constantly plaguing their relationship is their immaturity. Connie has a bit to answer for. After waiting so long to tell her parents about her dating Bobby, they spent a fairly long amount of time in the show having to hide their relationship, rather than getting out in the open and dealing with the consequences as they come. Now, to be fair to both of them, they are only preteens and have good communication by the standards of people their age. But they are still kids and are not ready emotionally for a long-term relationship yet. On top of that, once Con backs off and they start dating openly, they begin to realize there isn't enough common ground for a relationship. So they do the responsible thing and break up. Even after they break up, they remain good friends and still care about each other. Who knows? Maybe if they met later in life after growing up, they might have actually worked out. Next is Luann and Boomhauer. This one was short-lived. It wasn't even the real focus of the episode, but it still happened, so we're counting it. In this episode, Hank's attempt to help Luann with her love life backfires after she starts dating Boomhauer.
Boomhauer?
Boomhauer wasn't looking for anything long-term. He lets her stay with him while she works out her issues with Hank, but he is cold and distant with her. Meanwhile, Luann can tell this isn't working out, but is only sticking by this relationship to get at Hank. And they break up off-screen near the end of the episode. Now we have Bill and Reverend Stroup. They had a lot of fun with their secret relationship, to the extent that after they come clean, Bill gets bored. And this leads to him breaking up with Reverend Stroup. We're putting this one on our lower half because the excitement created from the secrecy seemed to be what was keeping the relationship alive, which is not healthy. They had a lot of fun and there was no abuse. But any relationship that you can only be excited about if it's a secret does not stand much of a chance of surviving. Stroup is less understanding of Bill's shortcomings than Ann Richards was, and it is shown that there is indeed hard feelings. The best thing we can say is Bill didn't drag this relationship out too long after he realized he wasn't invested anymore. Rounding out the neutral category, we have Luann and Buckley. This was more of a run-on joke than an actual relationship. Buckley's too attached to be able to invest himself in a relationship with Luann. It's also implied that he's only dating her for physical reasons. Luann seems to care about their relationship more than him, but she never really pushes him to be a better person or to communicate with her more clearly. On top of that, when Buckley dies in an explosion, she's more traumatized by her disintegrated hair than by her dead boyfriend. There's nothing between these two emotionally, and even if Buckley had survived, we couldn't see this relationship lasting too much longer. Okie dokie, now on to the absolute worst. These are the toxic relationships of Arlen, Texas. Let's start with Cotton and Dee Dee. What makes them toxic is a lack of respect and responsibility. Cotton doesn't view Dee Dee as his equal.
Now, what did you say, baby cake?
He sees her as more of his live-in maid and cook, and we're not sure what she sees in Cotton. The best thing we can say about this relationship is that it doesn't seem as toxic as Cotton's marriage to Tilly, and trust us, we'll get there. Cotton may actually love Dee Dee, but it takes a lot more than love to make a marriage thrive. It takes hard work and accountability, neither of which Cotton has any interest in. Our next spot goes to Bill and Lenore. This ended before the show began. However, we get a good idea of what this marriage was like from the way the characters talk about it. Hank says they were always fighting so loud the whole neighborhood could hear them. Now, it takes two to fight, so Bill is just as guilty. It's understandable how emotions can run high, especially with a spouse who is constantly unfaithful to you. Lenore was emotionally abusive to Bill. She was putting him down and gaslighting him, even walking out on him on Christmas Eve. This marriage turned Bill into the man we see in King of the Hill. Hank says it best, Lenore is a real backbreaker. Cotton and Dee Dee had an unhealthy relationship, but unlike Dale and Nancy and John Redcorn, at least there was some honesty. It was loving and caring, especially in later seasons. Before we get into how terrible Nancy is, it is fair to point out that Dale is a train wreck. And in many ways, he's a big child who's incapable of taking care of himself. In fact, Nancy takes care of not only bringing home the paychecks, but also being the responsible parent at home. He performed his experiments in the house and left the remnants laying around. That doesn't justify an affair, but it also doesn't make things easier for Nancy when she has to pay for the bills and do the housework. And his crazy conspiracy theories don't make things easier. With that said, the couple's portrayal in the show is practically centered around Nancy's endless cheating with John Redcorn. If Nancy left her husband, that would be one thing. We can't condone abandoning a marriage for a fling, but it would have been a lot quicker and more honest. Though she does get her comeuppance when she finds out John Redcorn was actually cheating on her during her affair. This ongoing cheating over the course of their relationship is terrible, and the fact that she's taken it to the extreme of hiding the fact that their kid isn't even Dale's biological son is one of the most despicable things someone can do in a relationship. And John Redcorn has a lot of responsibility to bear as well. He's ruining relationships with infidelity, and Dale and Nancy's is the most serious example. But it's nothing compared to Cotton and Tilly. These two divorced before the show started. However, the few brief glimpses we get into their marriage seems awful. Let's be honest what made this marriage fail. I'll give you a hint. It has no shins, a best friend named Topsy, and killed 50 men. It's safe to say Cotton made Tilly take care of all the work the same way he does with Dee Dee.
Well, actually, Hank, I took odd job.
What makes this worse than his second marriage, though, is that he is way more antagonistic to Tilly than he ever has been to Dee Dee. Even after they divorced, Cotton never misses an opportunity to rag on her. Usually, when a relationship fails, both people involved carry some of the blame. This is one of those rare situations where there was a clear-cut bad guy. We're giving the silver medal of toxicity to Bill and Leanne. In this episode, we're introduced to Luann's mother, Leanne. Right from the get-go, we see how this woman is manipulative and sleazy. Eventually, her paths cross with Bill, and things get flirtatious pretty quick. The first obvious issue here is how she is constantly having Bill spend all his money on her, to the point he can't even afford his medication for his toe fungus. Yes, toe fungus. Just watch the episode. Ironically enough, it's the return of Bill's toe fungus that drove Leanne back to drinking. She became angry, hostile, and even violent towards Bill. She hit him, and even threw a glass bottle at his face. That could have caused serious damage if he hadn't ducked in time. Domestic abuse is what makes us put this into our second place spot. Other toxic relationships in this show may be full of manipulation, gaslighting, and verbal abuse, but this is the only one we ever actually see get physical. We're just glad Bill got out before this relationship got too far. For our most toxic relationship, we're giving this to Hoyt and Leanne. We're putting this above Bill and Leanne because despite the fact that he's a flawed person, Bill is a good guy. Hoyt, on the other hand, while not quite as bad as Leanne, is still terrible. He's a schemer, a liar, and a thief, amongst other things. Even their relationship started out bad. According to Hank, Hoyt was planning on marrying a decent woman who worked as a pharmacist. But during his bachelor party, Leanne was hired as his entertainment.
Yeah, Leanne's bad news.
They hit it off pretty well, and Hoyt left that healthy relationship for this one. We can only imagine how their worst traits are codependent, and eventually culminated in Leanne stabbing Hoyt with a fork. Despite us never seeing their relationship or even having them share an episode, this has to be our worst relationship. Most of the others on this list have some sort of redeemable quality, even if it never got physically violent. It's the lowest possible bar a relationship can clear, but this is one of the only two that does it. And at least Bill really tried in his relationship with Leanne. His negative traits never spurred her on, unless you want to count the toe fungus. It's actually pretty surprising that after growing up in a home with two petty people that made each other worse, Luann turned out so well.
King of the Hill was a show about changing times and culture wars which benefited from a changing America. So today, we're going to document what we believe is the most accurate order of events for this amazing show. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is the King of the Hill timeline. Like our SpongeBob timeline, we had to make a lot of assumptions, and for most of the episodes, we assume the air date is the date the episode takes place, unless we specify otherwise. And something important to note, the air dates are important because many of the trending things featured in each episode come from a certain year, even though our characters stay roughly the same age throughout. It's one of those odd cartoon time frame things that we're just meant to suspend disbelief for. And of course, we're not going to talk about every single episode, but we'll focus on the ones that we think are the most interesting or important to the timeline. We also have official dates for a lot of things, so that makes the first half of the timeline easier. So let's get started with the Roaring 20s and Great Depression, the 1920s and 30s. Although not much of importance happens during this time, Cotton Hill is born in 1927, his ex-wife, Tilly Garrison, in 1929, and then Buck Strickland in 1931. Besides that, World War II wasn't too far away, and would actually play a key role in the Hill lineage. World War II and after, the 1940s. With the start of World War II, Cotton felt he needed to serve his country, so in 1941, when he was 14, he lied to Uncle Sam and joined the military.
You want to hear that story, Fatty?
Sir, yes, sir.
From the years 1943 to 1945, Cotton served with the Allies in the war, and this is where he supposedly killed 50 men. Cotton made a lot of claims about the things he did during the war, ranging from climbing the cliffs of Normandy with an ice cream maker on his back to being stuck in a Japanese POW camp. He also claimed to crawl through a minefield to get a pipe for his general in 1944. Two official dates also stand out, such as January 30th, 1944, where he led a crew to invade Anzio, which was confirmed by the other veterans. The other one is May 2nd, 1945, which is when Cotton allegedly invented a bayonet technique that the military still uses. Towards the end of his tour, he escaped a Japanese Zero after being stranded in the ocean, fought off sharks, and charged a Japanese machine gun nest before having his shins shot off. Luckily, he was able to survive by beating the Japanese to death with a big piece of his friend, Fatty. After the war ended, Cotton was in a Japanese veterans hospital and met Michiko, and the two started a relationship which led to the birth of Junichiro in December of 1946. Cotton was forced to leave Japan by the military after he got better, and he didn't go back to Japan for a long time. Post-World War II, the 1950s. A quick stop in the 1950s is necessary due to the sheer amount of main characters who were born during this time. Hank, Bill, Boomhauer, and Dale were all born in 1953. Peggy and Nancy being born in 1954, and Con was born in 1957. No other majorly important events seem to happen within this decade to the main characters, but that changes in the following decades. The good old days, the 1960s and 70s. The 60s and 70s were decades where a lot of important events happened. Fan-favorite characters like Min and John Redcorn were born in these years, 1960 and 61 respectively. Not to mention that Lucky was born in 1962 and Dee Dee Hill was officially born in 1966, although later statements contradict this. Another big thing that happened in the 1960s was the Arlen High School Football League, where Hank, Bill, and Boomhauer were prominent players on the team, and Dale was the towel manager. During this time, Bill made a career touchdown record that would later be lost and then tied up, and Hank would cost the team an important game due to his ankle. However, the 70s were when things really started to pick up for Hank and the rest. While it's unknown exactly what year, it can be assumed that in 1970 is when Peggy and Hank really started dating, although it could be earlier as no official date exists. The following year, in 1971, Hank and Bill would both apply for the military, and while Bill would be accepted, Hank was denied thanks to his narrow urethra. It's also unknown exactly when, but somewhere between 1970 and 1975, Con spent 2 years in the killing fields in Cambodia during the Laotian Civil War. The following events also don't have official dates, but based on statements, we can place them in the late 70s. specifically around 1977 or later. Firstly, according to the episode It's Not Easy Being Green, Bill, Dale, and Hank left Boomhauer's car in the quarry, which flooded, and left his prestigious Sally missing for 20 years.
Hank committed this tragedy all alone.
Also during this time frame, Bill protects Hank in a bar, and this causes Hank to get a tattoo of Bill's name on the back of his head. According to the father, the son, and JC, Hank has been assistant manager of Strickland Propane for 20 years, which would place that in this time zone. On a side note, Buckley was born in 1978, and Luann is a year younger, having been born in 1979. The next generation, the 1980s. The 80s is another decade where not a lot happens outside of a few main characters being born. Firstly, in 1982, Lady Bird, the family dog, is born. Also in the year 1982 is allegedly when Dale and Nancy get married. While it's not a very good marriage, as merely a year later is when Nancy starts cheating on him with John Redcorn, they do stay together for quite a long time. Also, it's worth mentioning that from the year 1982 to 1984 is when Bill started getting shots for the government's Project Walrus, although it's unknown how true this government project is. The autumn of 1985 is when all three of the main child/teen characters are born. August is when Bobby was born, as he is the oldest. Joseph follows suit in September, and Connie is born in the month of November. Finally, prior to the start of the show, according to a visual joke in The Exterminator, Dale's dead bug seems to have started in the year 1987. This can be assumed thanks to the fact that Dale won Employee of the Year from 1987 to 2000, save for 1996 where Rusty Shackelford won the award. According to everything we can find, King of the Hill officially starts in 1997, the same year that it aired. The first season takes place in the first half of 1997 as far as we can tell. February 9th, 1997, Hank meets Willie Nelson, his personal hero, after Bobby accidentally throws a baseball bat at his head. March 2nd, 1997, the Suppanuusenpone family moved into Arlen and became a heavy fixture on Rainey Street. April 13th, 1997, Peggy becomes a Boggle champion after going through a long tournament. October 31st, 1997, the infamous Junie Harper incident, where one lady successfully bans Halloween for a brief period of time by framing Halloween as a Satanist holiday. November 2nd, 1997. Hank accidentally started using drugs to try and catch bass in the water and almost went to prison over it. 1998 had a few very interesting things happen to the cast of Rainey Street. On January 11th, 1998, Luann creates the Manger Babies from a bunch of puppets she found at a yard sale. April 19th, 1998, Luann's mother, Leanne, reappears at the Hill House and starts a relationship with Bill before being sent away again. May 3rd, 1998, Bobby gets a job at the Arlen Speedway and is abused by his boss. May 17th, 1998 is the most major event in this year, as this is when the Megalomart explodes due to a propane leak and Buckley dies because of it. October 6th, 1998. Peggy finds out about Nancy and John Redcorn's affair and initially wishes to tell Dale. 1999 is the year before Y2K, and a variety of fun things happen in King of the Hill, including some new characters being introduced. On January 12th, 1999, and the following days, Dale, Hank, Bill, and Boomhauer all become volunteer firefighters and accidentally help cause the fire station being burnt down and dropping the casket of a recently deceased volunteer. January 19th, 1999, Peggy spanks Stuart Dooley after she reaches a breaking point regarding his behavior and gets fired at first, but gets justice and comes back. February 2nd, 1999, Con gets a new job in Houston after telling Hank company secrets. April 20th, 1999, Pastor Karen Stroop came to Arlen and Cotton almost got imprisoned after a string of events that Bobby caused. April 27th, 1999, Peggy gets tricked by a prisoner to bring in drugs to the prison through the usage of a Boggle hourglass. May 4th, 1999. Buckley's Angel comes back down to Earth to lead Luann into joining a junior community college. September 26th, 1999. Peggy breaks all of her bones going skydiving due to the information of Cotton's son, GH.
All right, I'll call him GH. Good, Hank.
October 3rd, 1999. Cotton helps Peggy with her physical therapy by generally torturing her into walking. October 24th, 1999. Ricky Suggs breaks Bill's all-time touchdown record, but Bill rejoins the team and ties up the record again. October 31st, 1999. Peggy earns her third Substitute Teacher of the Year award after pushing Hank out of the running for that award. November 14th, 1999. The Hills are invited to New Orleans for a football game, and Don Meredith fails to sink the football into the hull of the can, meaning Hank earns no money.
Tough break, son.
December 19th, 1999. Hank steals propane in preparation for Y2K, and he goes crazy with fear regarding Y2K, thanks to Dale, but he makes up for it by buying a computer for his wife. The Middle Years, Seasons 4 to 10, 2000 to 2005. The year 2000 starts off the middle years of the series, which have a lot of interesting episodes that change the series heavily. February 6, 2000. Debbie, one of the employees of Strickland Propane, commits accidental suicide while trying to kill and/or seduce Buck Strickland. February 27, 2000. Luann finally moved out of the den at the Hill House and instead moved into the house across the street from them. On or around April 14, 2000, it turns out that Bobby may be the reincarnation of Lama St. Glug. April 30th, 2000. Nancy ends up breaking off her long-standing relationship with John Redcorn. May 21st, 2000. Peggy assaults and almost drowns Randy Travis for stealing her song. November 7th of this year is also when Hank and Luann both vote in the 2000 presidential election after Hank has issues with George W. Bush's handshake.
It was soft and damp. Let's just leave it at that.
December 17th of 2000. Bill started up a Christmas village on his lawn, but it goes on at least until January 15th of 2001, since they mention Martin Luther King Jr. Day. On February 25th, 2001, Hank accidentally becomes a pimp for a woman named Tammy and has to chase another pimp out of Arlen. March 4th, 2001. Dale has to give up the toxins he uses to kill bugs or it will kill him. So he gets another job at Stick Tech, but he soon goes back to exterminating afterwards. A few days later, on March 11th, 2001, Luann becomes a born-again virgin and almost marries Rhett Vandergraff. April 1st, 2001, Hank builds a doghouse for Ladybird due to Bobby's dander allergy. April 22nd, 2001, Dale sues his cigarette company so that he can pay for his wife's facelift, getting a countersue by the company instead of making money. May 6th, 2001, Hank finds out he has diminished gluteal syndrome, causing him to wear a fake butt, and dealing with those issues during the Durndal County mower race. Jumping forward to November 11th, 2001, Bobby takes a self-defense class that tells him to kick people in the groin. December 9th, 2001, Dale runs for his fourth term as Gun Club president and has to deal with his opponent Mad Dog's insanity. December 12th, 2001, Peggy accidentally kidnaps a young girl named Lupe from Mexico and ultimately isn't put in jail due to her poor Spanish comprehension. On December 16th and the following days of 2001, Hank starts building a habitat for humanity for Buck Strickland and says that he loves him, causing Cotton to hate him, and Jimmy Carter has to bring the two men back together as father and son.
I see a new era of trust and understanding between you.
Heading into 2002, we find a lot of very important changes happening to the cast of Rainy Street. January 6, 2002 is when Connie and Bobby break up but decide to continue staying friends. February 14th of 2002 is when Bill convinces Bobby that he will never find another person to love, causing him to try and get back together with Connie. On February 24th of that year, Hank is signed up by Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer to be the person to run the 2002 Winter Olympic torch across Arlen, but the flame falls in a puddle and snuffs out. March 17th, 2002, Peggy impersonates a nun in an attempt to get more full-time work. On March 31st, Bill steals the tank when he finds out about Project Walrus, riding it through Rainy Street. On April 14th, Peggy uncovers a conspiracy to sell tainted beer to Mexico and causes mass food poisoning among a group of higher-ups. April 21st, 2002, Luann accidentally joined a cult on her college campus. A week later, on April 28th, Nancy and Dale renew their vows and find out that Dale's dad is gay and didn't kiss Nancy on purpose on their wedding day.
I loved my dad like a father.
May 12, 2002, Cotton and the rest of the Hill family climb on a plane and fly to Japan. They meet Junichiro and his mother, and Hank shows Junichiro many American tendencies by the time they leave. And by that time, Junichiro has grown to not hate his dad. On June 5, 2002, Topsy Toppington, one of Cotton's war buddies, dies. November 17th, Bobby is tricked into creating a meth lab by Connie's cousin, Tid Powell. December 15th, 2002. This is when Hank accidentally cuts off Dale's finger with a skill saw and has to go to anger management. He eventually saves Dale's life from a garbage truck crushing him. January 12, 2003, Dale is hired by the Megalomart for a rat infestation that turns out to be Chuck Mangione. February 2nd, Luann started a boxing career thanks to Buck Strickland, who was rigging the fights. On February 9th, 2003, Hank and Dale try to invoke a vision quest in Joseph, but Dale gets one instead that makes him believe he is a Native American. March 2nd, 2003, Min, Nancy, and Peggy all try to run for the school board, but fail thanks to all of them sabotaging each other. March 16th, 2003. Bobby briefly became a salesman for Strickland Propane, breaking Hank's selling record in a short time, but he brought a large amount of bad press by failing to have any knowledge of propane. On March 30th, Buck loses the deed to North Strickland Propane in a poker game and joins Luann's Bible study class before trying to marry her. May 18th, 2003. Con's mother comes to Arlen and starts dating Bill, and Con tries to destroy the relationship. In the days leading up to and including October 31st, 2003, Trip Larson, a sausage mogul, starts dating Luann and tries turning her into a reincarnation of a lady from an advertisement, and he then dies a gruesome death.
Trip had a mental breakdown and is now a sausage.
November 2nd, 2003. Boomhauer's brother Patch comes to Arlen and gets married, even though he's shown to be quite a scumbag. The marriage is eventually called off. November 16th, 2003. Former Cowboy player Willie Lane moves to Arlen but has to leave because Hank threatens an assault charge on him. November 30th, 2003. Eduardo Felipe, a Mexican actor, hires Peggy thanks to her teaching skills, but Peggy thinks he's hitting on her, causing her to go home depressed. December 14th, 2003. Hank, alongside Bobby, Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer, bring Tilly her dead friend's furniture for Christmas. Moving into 2004, on January 4th, Bobby believes that Hank is a lot richer than he actually is, starting to spend a lot of money from Hank's account, causing a lot of trouble for the Hills. February 15th, 2004. Luann drops out of junior college just so she can go back to her haircutting dreams, eventually getting hired by Hank's barber. March 21st, 2004. Storms hit Arlen and the dam bursts, causing a massive flood that gives Bill too much power, locking Hank up when he gets back to the safe house, because they thought he caused the flood. May 16th, 2004. Connie gets denied from a summer school for being just another bright Asian girl, causing Con to break down and become his own boss, and become more similar to the rednecks he always made fun of.
I got a new boss and I love him. Me!
On November 7th, Peggy goes back to her family ranch and deals with Henry Winkler, having started to destroy the farm's supply line, but even though she saves the ranch, she is not thanked. December 19th, 2004. An old woman named Miss Wakefield wants to die in Hank's house, and he denies her, which causes a lot of blowback from others. Moving into 2005, on January 30th, Dale rereads the Warren Commission report and realizes that the US government may have been correct about JFK's murder, causing him to become a big fan of the government for a change. On March 30th, 2005, Luann starts dating Lucky, and Lucky tears up a football field after a set of events regarding an egomaniacal caretaker. April 10th, 2005. John Redcorn opens up a casino and eventually a child-friendly native village on his land. On April 17th, Dale becomes the smoking bandit by going into locations and smoking to annoy the owners by disobeying their no-smoking ordinances and causing Joseph to look up to him. May 1st, 2005. Nancy moves up from being a weather girl and becomes co-anchor on the news after a wildfire. May 15th, Bill goes AWOL from the army when he joins an all-male chorus group, thinking no one would notice he was gone. On September 25th, Peggy tells people to mix ammonia and bleach, which makes a poisonous gas after she stops stealing ideas from Min. November 6, 2005, Bill makes his home into a halfway house for a short time to have more people around him.
We're working on taking emotional risks.
The show ends. Season 10 to 13, 2006 to 2008. That said, 2006 is by far the most packed year in the series. The reason why 2006 is so packed is because we find out in the season 10 finale, edumacating Lucky, that Luann is pregnant. And it turns out that Luann is pregnant for 3 seasons until season 13. Specifically the episode Lucky See, Monkey Do, which would make her pregnant for several years. This is just another example of that cartoon timeline logic, in which we suspend disbelief. In 2006, we have 3-ish seasons of content to wade through, so we need to make a lot of assumptions. January 29th, 2006, Hank's softball team, the Zephyrs, become undefeated and decide to go up against another undefeated gimmick team called the Ace of Diamonds and his Jewels. They lose 63-1. March 9th, 2006, Bobby shadows a man named Peter Sterling who cleans up animal waste and has a good time doing it. Hank is surprised at how profitable his business is, and Bobby starts up a vomit cleaning service, but Hank shuts it down by staging the assault of Peter. April 9th, 2006. The Hill family's church pew is stolen, so Hank and the rest go to a megachurch. But they tell Karen Stroop that they would tell everyone about the megachurch if they didn't get their seat back, which they do. April 30th, 2006. Joseph and Bobby quit their arrow spinning job so they can panhandle. Bobby eventually gets a real job, and Hank tells people not to give the panhandling teens any money. May 14th. Lucky fails to get his GED, thanks to Peggy, so he could marry Luann. They have a shotgun wedding afterwards. This is also when we find out that Luann is pregnant. In the summer of 2006, Lucky gives Bobby a large serpent named Josh that escapes into the sewers, and Dale and Hank need to go catch it since the snake catchers were tricking people. Also in the summer of 2006, Peggy fakes her death to get out of a contract with Cozy Kitchens. Not long after, Lucky and Luann get married after a convoluted plan from Lucky's lawyer to sue Strickland Propane after slipping and falling over while working for Dale's Deadbug.
If you want to play hardball, we could probably take Gribble's house.
October 7th, 2006. Bobby becomes a member of the Powder Puff Girls at Tom Landry Middle School. On November 11th, 2006, Cotton Hill dies after slipping on a hibachi grill and getting severely burned. On November 18th, Hank buys tough steaks from the Megalomart, so instead he goes to the local co-op because they were farm to table. On November 9th, 2006, Min and Khan finally get to join the Ten Rivers Country Club thanks to Min's skeet shooting prowess. In late 2006, Lady Bird gets so old that she goes deaf and bites Hank on the hand. Also in late 2006, the Arlen City Council bans trans fats for a short amount of time. Luann's father Hoyt comes to Arlen with only 1 strike left from having life in prison. Hoyt ends up sending Lucky to jail but is forced by Hank to admit to his crimes.
Hank, don't tell Luann I went down like this.
In early 2007, Ted Wasanasan buys up Bill's neighbor's house and tries to turn it into a McMansion. Also in early 2007, Buck Strickland makes a MySpace page for Strickland Propane, but it gets taken over by a fired individual, and she is ultimately rehired and changes it back to normal. February 8th, 2007, Gracie is born after 3 seasons of Luann being pregnant. February 15th, 2007, Buck meets his long-lost son, Ray Roy, and the two get drunk and almost cost Buck his induction into the Propane Hall of Fame. By the end of the episode, both Buck and Hank are inducted into the Propane Hall of Fame. On March 8th, 2007, Bill accidentally breaks Hank's nose during football practice, but Hank comes back and still wins the game. On May 10th, 2007, John Redcorn and Luann make a multitude of direct-to-DVD videos of the Manger Babies. In the summer of 2007, Boomhauer switches houses with a Canadian family who seem to despise America and Texas, and got in the group's crosshairs. Hank, however, still helps the Canadian neighbor out of jail, but he doesn't appreciate it. On the 4th of July, Rainy Street goes to war, while Bobby becomes a born-again Christian. On September 13th, 2007, Bobby joins a meat inspection team, and while the team doesn't like him, he manages to win the competition. Bobby and Hank have a barbecue that the whole neighborhood enjoys, and the show ends in a similar way to how it started. In March of 2008, a year after the events of Blah My Nose, Hank and the rest go to the next town over and make fun of the football captain for being a loser.
Happy loser-versary!
Logically, since those events of the episode take place in 2007, from what we can tell, we can logically place these events in 2008. And with that said, the end of King of the Hill is here. We had to make a lot of assumptions as we hit the end of the series. So tell us in the comment section below, what was your favorite era of King of the Hill? King of the Hill has given us a lot of heartwarming and memorable episodes, but the show has also given us more than a few stories that got surprisingly dark. But which of these situations that occurred in Arlen, Texas were truly the most unsettling or disturbing? That's what we're looking at today. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and these are the darkest King of the Hill moments. For this list, we'll be covering episodes with content that was darker than the average King of the Hill episode. While the series does cover a lot of real-world struggles and can occasionally steer into dark or frightening territory, there are 10 times that we felt made the most lasting impression, and in some cases, were just downright dark. First up on our list is Hilloween. This was another early story in the series. Halloween is typically seen as a time of mischief and fun, but in this special, the Hills came face to face with another type of ghoul. This one came in the form of Junie Harper, a radical believer that condemned anything she considered to be against the Bible. Now, having beliefs is perfectly fine, but Junie was a horrible example of it. The woman was irrational, always blowing things up out of proportion. She tried outlawing Halloween, tried coercing a bunch of children into joining something called the Hallelujah Club by using fear tactics, and got Luann to join her by using the same methods a cult would use to condition someone. Junie was a fairly delusional and obsessed woman. She blamed the death of her cat on Satanists to prove her arguments, disregarding the fact that she clearly ran over the animal while hunting down Bobby and Hank. She called Peggy and Hank terrible parents for letting their son act like a normal kid. She hired a bunch of men to help influence kids to join her club. She even set up weird skits that taught children the wrong information about evolution and sex to make them frightened enough to believe her ideology.
Do not encourage this monster. This is vile.
Without a doubt, people like Junie are dangerous. When you allow yourself to believe anything, you put yourself in a position of being able to be manipulated like Luann was shown to be throughout the episode. That might not seem as scary as some other Halloween specials, but it's a message to take into consideration. Next up, we have Mrs. Wakefield. This was one of those episodes that was different levels of disturbing all throughout it, and is not what you would expect from a Christmas episode of an animated show. While making preparations for Christmas and the Eve party, the Hills meet an old woman by the name of Mrs. Wakefield, who tells them about her time growing up and residing in the house before they moved in. It sounds sweet enough, but it soon becomes darker as she recounts how her sister died, describing how she dragged herself from what was now Bobby's room to a spot down the hall. Once the Hills are ready to have her out of their home, Mrs. Wakefield reveals her true intentions: to die in the house she grew up in.
I want to die here.
The rest of the episode shows Mrs. Wakefield trying various methods to get into the home so she can die in the house. She tries forcing her way in by using her walker. She taps on all the windows, urging Bobby to let her in by offering him candy. She tries locking herself in the bathroom. She hides from the family in the hedges to sneak inside. It even gets to the point that she fakes her death by submitting a false obituary to get the family's guard down. We had to include this episode for a few reasons. The first is the clear discussion of death all throughout. Mrs. Wakefield makes more than a few comments about simply slipping away if she held her breath long enough. On top of that, Dale gets the idea to try and turn his house into a haunted bed and breakfast, and is seen trying to convince Mrs. Wakefield to die in his home instead of Hank's. He even tries to offer a dog to keep her company in the afterlife.
I could get you a dead little lapdog to keep you company.
The second reason we added it is because of the lengths the old woman goes to accomplish her goal. Frail senior citizen or not, she flat out harassed the family and even terrified Bobby. She had to have the police called on her and played the role of a victim when the officers appeared, meekly asking what she did wrong. It was a relief that she was able to finally reach some compromise with the Hill family, but it was a stressful time right up until the very end. Next up is King of the Anthill. One of the earliest episodes of the series, it took a very drastic turn. It begins, simply enough, with Hank looking to improve his lawn before a block party. The dilemma of figuring out why his grass is looking worse than Con's leads Hank to the conclusion that Dale's bug spraying is a factor, and so he fires him. Dale, infamously vindictive, decides to get back at Hank by sneaking fire ants onto his brand new lawn. It may not sound like the setup of a dark story, but that all changes when Bobby and Joseph decide to play with the ants and Bobby brings a queen inside. In typical Bobby fashion, he tries as hard as he can to smell the pheromones coming off the queen that Joseph had told him about, and the result is disturbing. While Hank is trying to deal with getting rid of the ants and trying to revive his lawn, Bobby is seen becoming almost mindless. We even get a scene where he crams a bunch of sugar in his mouth before we see him dropping from his mouth into the bowl where he is keeping the queen and other ants. That dead-eyed stare he gives as he addresses the ant as "my queen" is something that sticks with a viewer in the worst kind of way.
Yes, my queen.
The end of the episode ties in both stories when Bobby, after trying to free his ants, is attacked by a whole colony. We then see a terrified Bobby, looking more like a mass of fire ants, slowly moving towards his father for help. Luckily, Dale is there to save the day, latching onto Bobby so the ants crawl onto him, and for a brief moment, we are unsure whether Dale is still alive. A hell of a ride for a first season episode. Next on the list is Pretty Pretty Dresses. Bill is already established as one of the most depressed members of the show. He's always seen struggling, stating that it was his divorce that made him lose his confidence and self-worth. The episode begins on a pretty somber note, with Bill bursting into tears as they drink in the alley, and it doesn't get easier from there. We learn that Bill spent the holiday season having dinner with Hank and his family, and that Peggy, Bobby, and Luann were not very impressed with the decision. We see that Bill has a habit of making their dinners uncomfortable, bringing up Buckley's death and Bobby's ex-girlfriend Marie.
You ever think about that dead boyfriend of yours?
It forces Hank to have to choose between inviting Bill to dinner again or following his family's wishes. When Hank tells Bill that he wants a family dinner without him present, Bill ends up not taking it too well and decides to jump off of his own roof in an attempt to end his own life. What follows is seeing Hank, Dale, and Boomhauer attempting to juggle watching Bill to be sure the man makes no more attempts on his life. But this episode didn't make our list just because of its talk about depression. We see Hank, the man who normally has all the answers to everyone's problems, in unfamiliar territory. He tries getting through to Bill in a way that makes sense to him, but since Hank had no real understanding of depression, he was little help and unknowingly pushed his friend closer to the edge.
I don't feel anything.
After Bill begins dressing up, pretending to be Lenore, and crashes the Hills' Christmas party, Hank is finally able to figure out a way to give Bill closure, learning that Bill had to confront Lenore on his own after being deserted. We mentioned this episode when covering our list for Bill, and we have to admit that while it's hard to watch Bill spiral, it is an episode where he eventually shines through. The episode didn't end with Bill magically getting over all of his problems. We know by the time the credits roll that he's still going to be in pain over his divorce. He's still going to be bitter about how Lenore left him. But that's what makes it such an important message and such a great episode. Next up, we have Propane Boom Part 2. In the previous listing, we mentioned how we're not used to seeing Hank not be the man with all the answers. There's something about seeing someone who has a lot of control over their life be at the mercy of a very normal problem. At the start of the story, Hank has to face losing the job he loved at the hands of Megalomart after the superstore gets a propane department. Not only did the corporation kill off Strickland Propane and countless other privately owned stores, but they did it in a way that didn't even come close to meeting the bare minimum of safety and quality standards. Even after being scolded by Hank to not drag propane tanks by their valves, Buckley still did, being too lazy to lift them properly.
Trainees, you know how it is.
A mistake that cost him his life when the tanks began leaking and the Megalomart exploded. We're giving special attention to the second part of the story because after the explosion, Hank is in a complete denial about being traumatized by the event. He refuses to barbecue or return to the now open Strickland Propane, now afraid of working with propane at all. Of course, Hank isn't the only one struggling after the incident, as we see a formerly bubbly Luann start to reject anything remotely beautiful or optimistic, and a worried Bobby who clearly doesn't understand why his father isn't doing so well. There's also Con, who is seen throughout the episode expressing that he saw Buckley as a sort of son after getting to know him, enjoying how much Buckley being around annoyed Hank. While Con is often seen to just make jokes or vindictive comments in episodes, he was a large part of this plot. Con speaks at Buckley's funeral, telling the story of a man on the verge of death who took the time to enjoy a strawberry before being devoured by tigers. While the story was brushed off as a bad joke by Hank, it gave the important message of being able to enjoy life even when facing death. A message Hank didn't see until he was trying to comfort Bobby.
You need to relax and enjoy life.
Con also helps to get Luann to start grieving, demanding to know why she was suppressing her sorrow with pointless anger, leading to Luann reflecting on the loss in a healthy way. Moving on, we have another manic Con day. Speaking of times where Con really shines, this next listing is far more focused on the Laotian man. After Min leaves with Connie to visit family, Peggy asks Hank to check in on Con for Min, with his wife claiming that Con hadn't been left alone in years. While things start off well enough, with Con and Hank taking on a project together for Grill Stravaganza, we learn that Con was on medication that evened him out. When Hank tells Con not to worry about filling the prescription, it leads to Con soon spiraling into a series of highs and lows, as we learn that he suffers from manic depression.
Sadness covers me like a blanket.
As we saw when Hank was dealing with Bill's breakdown, Hank is not the best person to help in times of depression since he doesn't fully understand how it works. After he gets the pills from Mexico with the help of Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer, Hank is reluctant to give them to Con, not wanting him to lose motivation for building the grill, justifying that Con is plenty happy and wasn't hurting anyone. What's more, Hank showed he didn't understand how the medication really helped. He initially thought Con would need to take all of the pills at once to get back on track, and when Con did take the proper dosage, Hank assumed they would work right away. The episode was another great example of how depression can affect a person, and how little it's really understood because of so many years of stigma. Con going from laying on the couch to suddenly having way too much energy left Hank and Boomhauer scratching their heads, while Dale and Bill were able to point out what Con was suffering from. In fact, Dale was the one to inform Hank what even someone out meant when it came to pills, and Bill was the one to hide anything remotely dangerous from Con, making the comment that people forget about the drawstring.
I'll confiscate his shoelaces and the drawstring from his pants.
Moving on, we have the episode High Anxiety. Being centered around the murder of Debbie Grund, this story held back no punches. Like the propane boom, this was a two-part episode. It started with Buck undergoing divorce from his wife, Miss Liz, who had found out about Debbie and Buck's relationship. Losing his house, his company, and much of his money, Buck is forced to reside with Debbie while she is left to deal with Miss Liz's wrath at Strickland Propane. Hank then gains a lot of unwanted advances from Miss Liz and Debbie, finding himself being blackmailed by Debbie to have an affair and leading Hank to be in her apartment when everything begins to go wrong.
I'm going on a trip. I look like I'm doped out of my gourd.
Debbie's body is discovered in the Sugarfoot's dumpster by Peggy, leading to an investigation that placed Hank as a suspect. As if that wasn't bad enough, even Buck tried using Hank as a scapegoat, planting false evidence in Hank's truck and recording an out-of-context conversation. The episode was made even more suspenseful when even Hank himself was unsure of his innocence, his last memory being that he mistakenly smoked pot with Gail, thinking it was just a homemade cigarette. In the end, we do find out that Debbie had unintentionally ended her own life when carelessly handling Buck's gun as she crawled hauled into the dumpster, but the story is very well received among fans.
Sorry about that whole frame up there, Tano. I was under a lot of stress.
Taking the bronze medal is Lupe's revenge. We all know Peggy likes to be seen as an educator that knows everything about Mexican culture, but this was a time where her pride really didn't do her any favors. After being asked to chaperone a field trip into Mexico, Peggy makes a series of mistakes. She misdirects the bus from the museum, takes the children to a butcher when she thinks it's a petting zoo, and tries to cover up her lies by playing off a chicken being killed as a magic trick. But the thing that took the cake was when she mistakenly forced a young girl to join the students back home, not realizing until it was too late that she had kidnapped a small child.
Long live Mexico! Now where are your parents?
The rest of the episode is Peggy hiding the young girl away in her office before attempting to sneak her back into Mexico, with Peggy quickly arrested afterwards. We had to include this in our video discussing Peggy's worst deeds, and it truly is one of the worst things that she has ever done. And to top it off, Peggy didn't seem to receive much of a punishment for her actions. Sure, she was threatened with jail time, but she was let off after it was clear that she was terrible at speaking Spanish, showing that she couldn't have communicated with Lupe enough to really threaten her.
I'm going to jail!
He said you're not guilty.
But the whole ordeal had to be on this list since this was no doubt a traumatic experience for Lupe. Being dragged onto a bus just because she was trying to sell goods to help her family. Being taken into a strange home and forced to hide away in a small room, unable to communicate with anyone around her to ask for help, and being uncertain as to what fate awaited her. Our second darkest episode of King of the Hill is Fun with Jane and Jane. We mentioned cult-like tactics and mentality in a previous listing, but we couldn't have a darkest of King of the Hill list without mentioning the Janes. It begins innocently enough with Luann trying to find some friends on campus by joining a sorority. After being mocked by some of the more popular houses, she is led to the Omega House where things begin to quickly go downhill. The leader of this group wastes no time trying to get young girls to join them. The new residents of the house undergo sleep deprivation, borderline starvation, and brainwashing.
But you can trust us. We will tell you when you're hungry.
All of their names are taken from them, and any unwelcome behavior is met with being locked in a dark closet while being yelled at. Peggy, not realizing what the group really is, simply takes Luann back to the Omega House where they both are renamed Jane, and almost taken off to a farm for free labor to make jams and jellies. While it might sound like a ridiculous plotline, this is actually a very real concern for people. Not everyone out there has your best interests at heart. Even those that want to do harm to you or use you for their gain will often play it off that they are the best option for you and that you really have no one else. It's a cautionary tale that is valuable to everyone. And finally, taking first place, we have Pygmalion. After Luann loses her job thanks to her Aunt Peggy's meddling, she starts to become close with Trip Larson. Luann isn't known for making the best judgment calls with many of her relationships, and this one was no exception. After Luann got into an argument with Peggy over dating Trip, she finds herself now living in Trip's home with him, where she quickly learns that he isn't as stable as he came off as. Trip then begins changing Luann's appearance by taking over her wardrobe and dyeing her hair while she sleeps.
I took the liberty of dyeing it while you were asleep these last 14 hours.
Trip's intentions are revealed when, during their Halloween party, he informs Luann that he wanted her to take the role of Larson's pork product girl. The idea of marrying a man she had never met to help Trip's delusions, and seeing the man imitate a pig to resemble the old ad, sends her running. What follows is a terrifying scene where Luann is being chased in a slaughterhouse, a manic Trip Larson laughing about how they could be pork products together. What makes this even more tragic is in his final moments. Trip is shocked and brought back to reality for a brief moment, questioning where he is and why he's in a pig suit before losing his life.
Trip had a mental breakdown and is now a sausage.
The episode was actually banned for some time, so it makes sense that it ranks as #1 on our darkest moments list.
Though we've covered King of the Hill pretty intensively, we never run out of things to talk about when it comes to our favorite Arlen residents. And today, we're looking at the parents. Specifically, we want to know who does the best job raising their kids and what parents just ain't right. So just a couple of notes about our criteria. In many cases, we paired parents together because each one's parenting skills were on par with one another. But in a few cases, we broke the parents up. as we felt that there was a significant disparity in parenting ability. And secondly, morality is a factor because this influences how a child is raised. But it is only one factor. We're also factoring in overall parenting skills and ability. And no, we aren't ranking Hank first. That's gonna go to Eduardo Felipe. A wealthy actor, he plays the very popular character, Monsignor Martinez.
Vaya con Dios.
We see a glimpse into his life when he invites Peggy to teach his children, explaining that they wanted to study in the United States. Sparing no expense for your children's education is a great thing, and when we see his children, they're well-behaved and respectful, not at all filling in the rich, spoiled kid stereotype. We could dock him a point for his choice to hire Peggy on a single class where he was the main speaker.
Be brave, little soldier.
Lucky for him, it worked out with just a very, very awkward misunderstanding.
I would never, never, never take you as a lover.
Alright, our silver medal of parenting goes to Hank Hill. Now, full disclosure, I know Peggy gets a lot of hate, but as far as parenting goes, Bobby gets a good balance between the two.
Do not blame Bobby. I taught him to keep an open mind.
That said, there's more parenting criticism to be thrown at Peggy, so Hank alone gets the silver medal. Hank is an all-around good dad, and his mission is to instill good values into his son because he believes that they will help him in life. He's a man of principle and puts his family above all else. Yeah, he has some issues. He struggles showing emotions to his son, but in his defense, being raised by Cotton likely screwed him up in that department, and he still makes the effort to make sure his son knows he loves him, even if it's difficult for him. The one thing that we see throughout the 13 seasons is that much of Bobby's goodness is influenced by his father's teachings. Hank might be a bit strict, but he teaches his son the importance of hard work and integrity, and compared to a lot of other dads on this show, he's definitely top tier.
We're not animals. We'll wait in line like everybody else.
We have to mention John Redcorn, which may seem strange, but frankly, Redcorn has gotten the short end of the stick in a lot of areas in life. He isn't welcomed as a father figure to Joseph, which eats away at him. Even though Nancy rejects John as a role model or father for her son, one to keep her family together, he still made a point to try and teach Joseph things that he felt were important.
I could give you and Joseph a ride home.
He stepped in when he felt Joseph was straying, making an awesome move by catching the arrow aimed at the panda, and even Dale confessed that John had a hand in Joseph's youth. He taught the young man to ride a bike, tie his shoes, and likely more than that. And we even see John have an emotional breakdown, seeking comfort from Hank when he realizes there's still a distance between him and his son.
I want my son back.
John Redcorn is something of a tragic figure, desperate to raise his son from a distance without Joseph even knowing that he is his. And the only reason that he doesn't reveal the truth is because he understands it would destroy Joseph's life in many ways. We're gonna quickly mention Tilly next. Hank's mother. Tilly is a loving mother to Hank, and if it wasn't for her, Hank would likely have been more emotionally screwed up growing up because of Cotton.
Mom, we're in public, one hand only, okay?
She can be described as overly naive and too trusting, but it seems like she just wants to finally have the opportunity to experience life for herself in her older age, though a lot of her naive decisions, such as falling for a male scheme, has Hank constantly worrying about her.
Show Mom some respect while Bobby's in the room.
Peggy is next.
Hill's in the crib. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so much of what makes Peggy a good parent is done in collaboration with Hank. Hank and Peggy are prepared for pretty much anything, from floods to teenage rebellion.
Go on, woman. Get me my dinner.
Bobby gets a good balance between the two, with Hank's need to control and stabilize everything, and Peggy boosting her son's confidence and encouraging his comedy. Heck, they even put up with their neighbors because they support Bobby and Connie's relationship, be it friendship or romantic. Now, what drops Peggy down a bit is, well, her narcissism.
I am what the magazines call a superwoman.
Whether it's a problem with low self-esteem or something else, Peggy has an incessant need to make everything about her. And although this is usually directed outwards to those outside her family, Hank and Bobby are the targets of this from time to time. One of the most deranged examples of this was when Peggy became jealous of Bobby's cooking skills because she felt it was a threat to what made her needed.
And my pork chops were sitting right there.
To the point where she literally stole their Thanksgiving turkey and biked across town in a disheveled mess to give the turkey to someone who would appreciate her.
I breastfed my Bobby. Big mistake.
Peggy has a lot of problems, but the truth is, these extreme cases against her son are rare. And she's quick to realize her mistake and remedy the situation because she loves her son more than anything. Now, this may surprise some, but we're placing Maddie and Doc, Peggy's parents, next. Now, Maddie isn't going to win Mother of the Year. Peggy frequently complains the woman was not supportive of her and was never impressed.
Do not say can't. You will not use contractions in this house.
Maddie even had this weird mindset when living in Montana that Peggy should have married a neighbor boy to get his land, stating love had nothing to do with it. And when Peggy didn't, Maddie blamed her for condemning the family.
If you'd married Sven, we'd be doing all right.
Now, we aren't saying Maddie is the best role model and Doc simply allowed all this to happen, but there are a few facts that remain. They taught Peggy how to fight and not only survive, but thrive. They taught Peggy to not take no for an answer and find a solution, even a crazy one. And while they didn't support Peggy having interest in something other than the ranch, they didn't keep her from it either. They let her play softball, they let her date Hank, they let her have her books on whatever subject. They embody tough love than they do absence of love, and ultimately made Peggy the mother and wife she is, for better or worse. Next, we have Con and Min. It's no secret how much they push their daughter into being the best. They make Connie practice violin and study to almost torturous levels, putting pressure on her to be the best in all she does.
Makes me practice violin 5 hours a day.
But it comes from a good place. And it's also something that is cultural. Both Con and Min learned English and left Laos just to provide a better life with more opportunities for their family, which is a pretty big accomplishment as parents. They did have a small lapse in judgment when told their effort wasn't enough, almost losing the house. But being reminded of his daughter's perseverance is what snapped Con out of his depressive state, and the fact they would sacrifice all they could to get Connie into a top summer program is saying a lot. Overly strict, yes, but for the right reasons.
I bet you never knew she could smile and play at the same time.
Dale's father, Bug, was not a frequent character. He was hated by Dale for years, mistakenly kissing Nancy when he tried to hide his homosexuality.
I loved my dad like a father.
But when he found out about the renewal, he showed up in spite of his fear. He told Dale he understood if his son still hated him, but gave him an apology face to face and tried to mend their relationship. He quickly caught on that Joseph wasn't Dale's, and while he didn't reveal Nancy's secret, he did encourage her to tell Dale on her own. He wound up being able to reconnect with his son and get to know his grandson, while finally being able to be honest about his own identity. And we feel that says a lot about what kind of man he is.
Any special friend of my dad's is a special friend of mine.
General Gum, Min's father, made it on the list. He isn't a welcoming man to Con, believing the former disco fan drug his daughter down, but he clearly has nothing but love for Min and Connie.
Stand down, descendant of fishermen!
He was revealed to have co-signed for their home in Arlen, and while he did try to break Con's spirit, he did relent when Min told the general to make things right. He was described as a ruthless man, whose version of laid back is taking over small boards rather than entire communities. But he created a small ceramic elephant collection for his daughter, which was sweet. He's rough on Con to say the least, but he loves his daughter and granddaughter.
You are a failure.
Enrique and Yolanda are a bit more frequent, but still apart from the main cast of Rainy Street. They aren't the most stable couple, having more than a few disputes over the years, with Enrique being kicked out briefly.
My marriage is crumbling. Our love is dead.
They don't manage their money well, as they almost lost their home due to Enrique's love of parties and blowing money. But to be fair, he also paid for a couple of funerals. But they do have love for their daughter by going all out for Inez's quinceañera. They also fought for their home and took their neighborhood back to its former glory.
You heard of a housewarming? This is going to be a house inferno.
So with that said, that ends our good section. Now, we enter the gray area. Keep in mind, many of these parents still have a lot of good, but are weighed down quite a bit by some bad. And a great example of that are Nancy and Dale. Now, we could have broken them up into separate entries because they both have very different problems, but they're pretty close to being on par with one another in terms of parenting quality. We'll state the obvious first. Nancy has lied to Joseph about his real father all his life, blowing off his concerns while growing up to cover her own infidelity. Dale has insisted that Joseph is an alien, recognizing that he wasn't there in person to impregnate Nancy, but says his sperm must have been used.
Joseph's real father is...
Nancy loves you.
An alien.
They have a mess of a relationship. likely messing up Joseph's perspective on how a functional marriage should be. And although they care about Joseph, they're both very selfish and irresponsible people. But they do care about their son's happiness and success. When Joseph was offered a scholarship, Dale insisted his son go to the best school available. He did a poor job of listening to his son's wants, and trying to give Joseph to a rich family was a bad call. But Dale did express his depression at having done so and was quick to seek forgiveness and right his wrongs.
You're back home and I'll never let you go again.
And as evil as Nancy can reveal herself to be towards other people, that dark side is never directed towards her son. They're both very flawed people, but do care for their kid. So we're going to mention Bill due to a couple of factors. First, his relationship with Bobby, and second, his brief fatherhood of Wally. No, we're not saying the Bill being Bobby's father theory is true, although it is compelling, but he does take a sort of fatherly role at times. Bill is easily manipulated and caves to anything if it means being liked. When he took the delinquent Wally under his wing, that's what resulted in Wally terrorizing the neighborhood and being a bad influence.
Now get off our property or I'll citizen arrest you.
It was good to see Bill found a way to straighten the kid out, convincing the judge the army was a better place than jail, which actually showed that he was capable of some tough love, despite his emotional need to please people. Bill's also shown to be a good role model when it came to tasks such as cooking, taking Bobby under his wing to learn the family barbecue recipe.
We only light the fire with a page of good news from the paper.
And like I said, while there are some odd theories about Bill being Bobby's biological dad, regardless, we can't argue that the way Bill looks out for the kid is touching. Billy has a lot of problems, and yet he still demonstrates an ability to be a moral parental figure when given the rare chance. Kat Savage, Michael's mother, is next. She spent way too much of her life chasing trends, dedicating her time and money towards every fad imaginable. She enrolled her daughter in a class just to help Michael have the fancy party, and she encouraged Michael and Bobby's interest in one another. She loses quite a few points because of her lifestyle. The fact that she changed her name just to be seen as more popular was not the right thing to teach her daughter, and it clearly had a poor effect on Michael, with the young girl throwing a fit from having her party ruined. Kat even makes some comments along the lines of getting Michael out of her treehouse again, and if it hadn't been for Peggy and Bobby's entrance, the girl would have freaked out about something else.
If it wasn't this, she'd freak out about something else.
Overall, she may mean well, but she's definitely teaching some seriously unhealthy habits to her daughter. Wesley and Annette were brief characters but made an impression. Wesley helped bring back the Straight Arrow program in Arlen, though he had his own way of doing it that Hank didn't agree with.
Hey, Dad, look! My fire's roaring!
While Wesley and his wife were indeed overprotective of their 6 children, they had their reasons to be. Their methods of banning sugar and violent video games weren't necessarily wrong, given their kids were so young and impressionable, and having various conditions such as hypoglycemia and ADHD, but the way they disgraced Hank for the way Bobby was wrong.
You're a bad influence, Bobby, and I won't have that here.
Additionally, their overprotective nature is just too much and will likely lead to a lot of problems for their kids later on. And the skills that Hank originally wanted to teach, that he condemned, were skills that were great to learn and emphasize self-reliance and discipline. Myrna, Lucky's sister, is next. Much like Wesley and Annette, she's controlling and raised her kids by the book, while looking down at anyone who does otherwise.
They aren't allowed to drink juice. They'll have water and read a book.
She may have been praised in the baby class for her know-how, but she still doesn't seem to think of her kids as more than a possession. She was quick to pawn them off on her husband Jason, just so she can make sure Luann got a hypnobirth, criticizing Peggy for treating Bobby like a disease.
This is what happens when you give kids juice.
Now, we're not saying being up to date on child safety is bad, but becoming so obsessed you don't even let your kids drink juice? We call that overkill. Lucky and Luann are not what people typically have in mind when it comes to parenthood, but the fact is they love and adore Gracie. The only reason we had to drop them so low on our list is because they're pretty clueless on how to actually raise a child.
Dealing with Gracie is harder than I thought.
Hank bestowed the advice that they will in fact make mistakes, but the best they could do was try, and providing a home with food and clothes was a good start. Luann felt lost being identified as just a mom for a while, even having to give up her career as a hairdresser, but that doesn't make her a bad parent. She and Lucky are always willing to learn from other parents and seek help in times of confusion, like when Lucky claimed he had a rolling baby.
I've got a rolling baby.
That said, they're both very irresponsible, and Lucky's life philosophies that involve mooching off other people, mixed with Luann's ignorance on just about everything, is a pretty bad influence on their kid. With the gray area complete, we now drop down into the bad and evil territory. These parents have a lot of problems. Ted and Cindy are parents to Chang, and it shows. Chang is a bully. He's self-entitled, gets his way without doing much work, and sees women as objects.
The chain train stops for the ladies.
We can only blame Ted and Cindy since they seem pretty clueless to their son and his limits. They buy his way into the best programs and schooling just to pump up his college applications and forbid Chang from dating Connie, just so they wouldn't have to be around Con and men.
We've been forbidding Chang to date Connie.
And we've seen plenty of examples of both Ted and Cindy being passive-aggressive and underhanded, such as Ted trying to trick Hank to join Nine Rivers, and Cindy making Peggy take over her role for a cozy kitchen. The Dooleys have earned a small spot on the list, with their most well-known appearances being when Dooley ran away and when Peggy was fired for spanking their son. It's easy to see that they do not have a handle on their child.
I'm sure Stuart deserved it. We know what a handful he can be.
Dooley is a well-known troublemaker, pantsing Peggy and beating up other kids. They're neglectful and seem to be fine with their kids behaving badly, so long as it doesn't bother them personally. Really quickly, we'll mention Dee Dee, Cotton's new wife. She seems to be completely incapable of a lot of motherly behaviors.
She ain't fat. I got her knocked up.
And doesn't really have a problem with her son being raised by a maniac like Cotton. She doesn't show any motherly instincts at first, though Dee Dee seemed to suffer from postpartum depression, rejecting GH when he was first born and showing no maternal instinct whatsoever. She allowed herself to be a doormat and had no problem pawning her baby off on a stressed Bobby or an injured Peggy.
You took Peggy's bottle and I took the baby's bottle?
All right, our bronze medal goes to Cotton Hill, the man who killed 50 men. While Cotton did love GH and did manage to teach Hank some life lessons, he was a pretty monstrous father. He was emotionally abusive to his son Hank, and really just about everyone else.
Hey, Hank's wife.
Cotton.
Many of Hank's problems with showing emotion are likely a result of having Cotton as a dad. Cotton also openly detests his son to varying degrees throughout the show. The reasons why Cotton isn't gold or silver are small, but worth mentioning. Firstly, Cotton may seem to hate his son, but when Jimmy Carter gave him the hypothetical option to press a hypothetical button that would erase Hank from existence, Cotton didn't press that button.
My father said he wouldn't obliterate me?
Additionally, on his deathbed, he revealed that despite having such a low opinion of Hank, he actually detested Peggy way more, saying that she wasn't even good enough for his loser son.
This was supposed to happen to you.
Which shows that he kinda cares about Hank, sort of. But the main reason why we'll give him a couple of points is because despite being an awful parent, he's actually a pretty decent grandparent who loves Bobby. Alright, we'll give him that. Buck Strickland, being a parent to Jody and possibly others, has earned a very low rank for obvious reasons. Peggy marked him right as a drunken adulterer, and Buck is proud of it. When he meets his son, his first idea is take the man out drinking and gambling.
What do you say to your old man buying you a drink?
He encouraged Jody to be just as reckless as he was, even though Buck's lifestyle led to a heart attack, a divorce, and a suspicion of murder. Even after they worked together to get Hank his job back, it was implied at the end of the episode that they went on another bender. Buck is an all-around degenerate, so this behavior is pretty much exactly what you would expect, old top. No one is more deserving of the title of worst parents on this show than Hoyt and Leanne. Alright, let's start with Hoyt, who's Peggy's brother. He left his wife after being attacked, initially insisting he didn't want to be near Arlen until he was sent her death certificate. When he did show up, he went right back to stealing, lying, and even framing Lucky for a robbery.
Whew, that's close.
Fortunately, Lucky got out, refusing to take the fall. But that was only after hearing Hoyt try to frame Luann, his own daughter, for drug possession. Leanne is not much better than her husband. In fact, if anyone is worse than Hoyt, it's her. When drunk, she's violent, loud, and indecent.
It was supposed to be a surprise!
The reason she had to be arrested was for attacking her husband with a fork, and she tried doing the same thing again to Buckley before Peggy stopped her. She used Bill for money and is both physically and emotionally abusive to every man she's in a relationship with, not to mention comfortable manipulating her daughter whenever she needs to. Truly, both the scum of Arlen.
I look like I'm doped out of my gourd.
In the Texas town of Arlen, there's a wide range of intellect to be found, from those who are a bit naive and easy to trick to the cleverest and wisest of the bunch. In terms of everyday smarts, who in the Rainy Street neighborhood shines at the top of the class, and who needs a few extra lessons? I'm Keefe Enosi with Wicked Binge, and this is King of the Hill characters, dumb to brilliant. With this list, we're mostly going to be focusing on the main characters of King of the Hill, so no minor or bit characters. With that said, let's get started. As always, we're going to be starting with the not so bright category, looking at the characters who could easily be classified as dumb or incredibly naive to the point of almost being a danger to themselves. At the top of this tier, we have Cotton's wife, Dee Dee. In all honesty, it's hard to know if Dee Dee is actually dumb or if she's simply depressed most of the time. While yes, she did choose to stay in a bad situation pretty much until the day her husband died, we do know that she and Cotton did care about each other in their own sort of way. As for Dee Dee herself, she never seemed too noteworthy in terms of skills nor accomplishments. Prior to meeting Cotton, she did basic tasks as a nurse working at the Veterans Hospital. When she gave birth to GH, there were moments where she either wasn't sure how to care for him or just simply forgot where she put him.
Where did I put... Oh, there it is.
Even while he was still strapped to her back. While we can't say that Dee Dee is dumber than other minor characters like Jimmy Witcher or some of the school bullies, her lack of any real accomplishments and tendency to not make smart choices put her in this spot by default. Following her is another blonde, Luann. It really does hurt us to put Luann here. As most fans know, Luann started out fairly smart. Emotional, sure, but still skilled enough with a wrench to fix up both Hank and Cotton's vehicles without too many issues, showing that she indeed had the makings of a good mechanic. Unfortunately, these traits were quickly forgotten about as the show went on, with the writers making Luann dumber and easier to manipulate. Although she had moments of being creative, such as with her Manger Babies show, she struggled quite a bit with both beauty school and community college, dropping out of both.
I just took a test last semester.
She knows just enough to eventually become a barber, but that's about it. She can be incredibly absent-minded and more often than not, lets her emotions drive her more than well-thought-out plans or goals. Funnily enough, Luann's husband, Lucky, is going to be ranked right above her. Much like Dee Dee, it's hard to know Lucky's true intelligence. Is he really as dumb as he sometimes comes off as, often being seen as fairly oblivious and easily trusting? Or is he simply happy enough with where he is in life to the point where he doesn't try to achieve more? When Peggy was trying to help him earn his GED, Lucky proved to actually know quite a bit of the material already, leading to Peggy being forced to sabotage him. Lucky was also savvy enough to sue Costco, earning him his famous settlement and his nickname.
By God, I got me a $53,000 settlement.
Outside of these instances, however, Lucky doesn't come off as all too bright. He can also be just as easily manipulated as Luann can be at times, so it makes sense that they'd be ranked right next to each other. We will give Lucky some credit though, as shown by the episode Strangeness on a Train. The guy's pretty great at solving mysteries. Next up, we have the first of our Rainy Street 4, Bill. This is another character whose intelligence is often influenced, or in some cases counteracted, by his emotions. While Bill's military know-how once allowed him to drive a real-life tank and his haircutting skills are apparently noteworthy, his desperate need for companionship makes it easy for others to manipulate and scam him out of his money, his home, and plenty of other things. Additionally, if Dale's not the one messing up the gang's plans, it's usually Bill instead. He does have his moments of being crafty though, like when he managed to convince the people of Arlen that they still needed to stay in the flood shelter. Unfortunately, Bill also has a habit of self-sabotaging when it comes to his romantic relationships, though again, it's hard to know if this is just him being dumb or simply acting on impulse and uncertainty. We're going to be ranking the not always business-minded Buck Strickland next. For as much success as Buck has had in his life, managing his own business and making a decent amount of cash compared to his employees, you have to wonder if he was just lucky. While Buck occasionally shows some businessman competence, the man seems to live by the mindset of not knowing when to quit when it comes to his many vices. Still, we have to rank him above the previously mentioned characters since, after all, he taught Hank everything he knew about the propane business. While Buck may be far from his prime, with his bad habits often leading him to be careless, it can't be denied that he, at one point, knew how to both survive and thrive within Arlen's small business marketplace. Finishing off this tier, we have Dale. Even a broken clock is right twice of the day, and that seems to just sum up Dale's intelligence as a whole. Let's start out with his more clever moments, as there are actually a few of them. He was the only one to correctly figure out that Chuck Mangione was hiding in the Megalomart, and he was able to trick his gun club into letting Hank and the rest of the gang go. Dale is also a fairly competent exterminator, and knows a ton about the ins and outs of the government, which in turn occasionally allows him to bypass all the red tape. He also knows how to play the keyboard pretty well. However, for as many great moments as Dale's had to prove his true brain power, the man is still pretty dumb in many regards. jobs. Many of his schemes end up backfiring horribly, and some of the conspiracy theories he believes in just don't make sense at all. He also has his moments of being easily manipulated, and he can often jump to wild conclusions. Really though, if not for his tendency to overlook logic, and often the obvious, like his dad being gay or Joseph not being his biological son, Dale could have easily made it into the next tier. Speaking of which, next up we have the average intelligence characters. They aren't too dumb, but they don't seem incredibly smart in any noteworthy way either. They're the definition of B and C students. Starting things off here, we're going to be ranking Cotton Hill. Being a soldier and later a colonel, it seems reasonable to think that Cotton would have quite a bit of survival skills that helped him live as long as he did. Although some may underestimate him due to how elderly he now is, Cotton's had moments where he showed how he could still be a force to be reckoned with. After all, it was Cotton who figured out that it was Khan and Min who were sneaking into the Hill's house and messing with their things.
I can smell it on this pillow. Now, confess.
He also knew how to inspire Peggy while he was helping her with her physical therapy. Unfortunately, we're still unsure how Cotton ranks on a traditional academic level. He's been known to mix up dates and get details wrong when recounting some of his stories. He was also easily manipulated into getting a timeshare, although we could argue that this was more due to his pride than any lack of intelligence. Overall, while Cotton may have a decent amount of street smarts, we can't rank him any higher. Following him, we have John Redcorn. Although most only know him as a ladies' man, John Redcorn does have quite a few of his own skills. He's well versed in his tribe's culture and traditions, making him incredibly informative. During the times where he's actually doing his job and not hooking up with his clients, he's also shown to be skilled as a massage therapist and new age healer. His talents as a musician are also noteworthy, even if it took him a bit to find a sound that worked for him. Outside of these niches, we feel like John Redcorn has average to slightly above average intelligence. He does lack knowledge in some fields like government bureaucracy, hence why he needed Dale to help him get some of his tribe's land back. Redcorn was also easily scammed by false Native Americans, being so desperate for a place for him and his band to play that he took out a loan without making sure that casinos were even legal in Texas.
That land is in Texas, where there is no Indian gaming.
Regardless of his morality, or lack thereof in some cases, John Redcorn often manages to be one of the more level-headed characters in Arlen. Getting back to the Hill family, we're ranking Bobby next. Although he may be just a kid, resulting in him being pretty irresponsible, naive, and even dumb at times, it can't be denied that for a 13-year-old, Bobby's got a pretty good head on his shoulders. While he doesn't excel in school, he was an asset on his school's quiz bowl team, being their pop culture expert. He's got a great eye for determining meat quality and meat judging, as shown in the series finale, and in Goodbye Normal Genes, he's shown being a natural at things like cooking and cleaning. However, because he is still a kid, it can take him a bit to catch on to things, and he can be pretty easily manipulated, such as when he unknowingly helped Connie's cousin build a meth lab and then brought it to school for the science fair.
Will you be my science fair partner?
In the episode No Bobby Left Behind, his teachers also felt that Bobby was dumb enough that he could easily pass as special needs. We see by the end of the episode, however, that once Bobby applied himself, he was ultimately able to pass the yearly standardized test. He may still have some growing up to do, of course, but we've got a good feeling that Bobby will take on the better and smarter parts of both his parents as he becomes an adult. Next up is the one and only Boomhauer. Speaking of level-headed, this could also easily describe Boomhauer, the most low-key of the Rainy Street gang. Though he has his moments of being careless or goofing off, like when he and Bill became obsessed with frying foods or whenever he gets caught up in one of Dale's schemes, he's never really the one who initiates any major screw-ups or bad plans. In fact, whenever Hank's not around, he's usually the one trying to give the others advice, being the first to recognize a bad plan, even if he sometimes has to be a part of it first. As contentious as it may be within the fandom, we also have to bring up Boomhauer's job as a Texas Ranger, a job that takes quite a bit of skill and competence. Additionally, he's another character who's a musician, being able to play the banjo. He's seen being good at painting in the episode Naked Ambition, and he can speak both Spanish and French. All in all, we feel like Boomhauer is almost right there with Hank in terms of being both level-headed and fairly intelligent. A bit above Bobby, we're going to be ranking his mother, Peggy, next. We're sure that many of you likely would have put Peggy a lot lower down, and to be honest, we can't completely blame you. One of the most memorable jokes with Peggy is just how terrible she is at Spanish, often mistranslating and misunderstanding even basic phrases. She was also easily tricked by a prisoner into becoming a drug mule, with her not even being able to figure it out until the prisoner flat out told her what she was doing.
You're going to bring me a brick of cocaine every week.
But while her ego and pride can sometimes blind her, we feel like Peggy can still be smarter than some fans give her credit for. When she puts her mind to it, Peggy can be very crafty, as seen when she snuck into the Alamo Beer boardroom and gave them the tainted beers, or when she was able to get everyone's money back from Dr. Vezosa in The Substitute Spanish Prisoner. Peggy has also been shown taking on a wide variety of jobs and occupations, from teaching and writing to running various businesses. Admittedly, these jobs also have seen a wide range of successes and failures, but her resume still isn't anything to sneeze at. So while it can easily be said that Peggy often makes dumb mistakes and decisions, we can't exactly say she's a dumb person overall. all. She just leans more on book smarts in most instances. Right on the edge between average and brilliant, we have Khan. As arrogant and foolish as Khan can sometimes be, never quite being satisfied with all the great things he already has and is always striving for more, it shouldn't be too surprising to see him this high up. In terms of skills and academics, he learned enough English to make it through the immigration process, eventually becoming a systems analyst. Khan is also skilled in Pencak Silat, an Indonesian form of martial arts, and in Just Another Manic Kande, he gets to show off his engineering skills when he helps Hank build a super grill for the Grill Stravaganza event. But, of course, Khan has made his own dumb mistakes. When it comes to schemes, like purchasing Scrubby's car wash or when he tried to get out of sharing his half of the Mexican condo with the Hills, they often fall apart quickly. This could be due to arrogance and Khan believing that he's too smart to need to think things through. This level of pride even prompted him to reveal confidential military information to Hank just to try and impress him. But much like Peggy, these more personal flaws and mistakes don't quite overshadow just how intelligent Khan can be when it comes to what he studies and works with. Finally, we have the brilliant characters, the ones who are either quite intelligent when it comes to certain fields or who are just all around clever and smart for the most part. Taking the silver medal of intelligence, we have Connie. Although she's one of the younger characters and, like Bobby, still has her own kid tendencies, Connie's proven to be one of the smartest characters on Rainy Street, even outshining her father when it comes to academics. She's incredibly intelligent as well as patient, still being able to excel in her studies even when everything around her is less than ideal, such as when her parents decided to live the hillbilly life by partying all the time. While she may have been originally pushed into being an overachieving student, it's shown that she does genuinely enjoy some fields of study and that she's naturally gifted when it comes to both academics and music, namely the violin. Additionally, out of the three Rainy Street kids, Connie is usually shown to be more logical than Bobby and Joseph, with there only being a couple instances when she's either been led into or actively chose to make bad decisions. Ironically enough, the only area where she's lacking is in her family's native tongue, as it's been shown that Connie is unable to speak nor understand much Laotian. However, given that this is often the case with many second-generation immigrants, we won't dock her too many points for this. Finally, our gold medal of intelligence is going to Hank Hill. While Connie may be the most book-smart character, Hank is the character with the most common sense and, more often than not, is the guy with the best advice to give.
You don't just get money because you ask for it.
We say often and not always, since being a guy who can be, let's just say, old-fashioned, to put it politely, he can sometimes be dismissive or unobservant of the new and unfamiliar, causing him to occasionally come off as naive. Do I look like I know what a JPEG is? You know. But when he's in his element, either while being an assistant manager or while trying to be a good neighbor and friend, Hank is really able to show off his true brilliance. He's a whiz with pretty much any power tool you could give him, knowing how to fix nearly anything around the house. He tends to handle even the most stressful of business situations well, having more than enough skill and talent to deserve the coveted manager title several times over, if only Buck would actually give it to him. Even when things around him seem to be at their lowest, Hank has been shown in several episodes to come up with clever plans and solutions, saving the day and screwing over the people who originally tried to trick him. Other talents of his have included guitar playing, woodworking, and fixing up trucks. Now, obviously, Hank isn't some sort of super genius, but there's something to be said about a guy who just has a really good head on his shoulders. A perfect representation of the best that Arlen has to offer, at least when it comes to his generation.